Chapter 141. Paula. As Ethan had anticipated, the unnerving sensation of being watched returned during the afternoon break. This time, he was ready. Carefully, he pressed a heart sigil onto the hide of the big beast stowed in his enchanted canister of amber milk. That single, heart-shaped rune would let the canister's spatial shift magic pinpoint the creature's location anywhere within 10 kilometers. Ethan couldn't teleport there himself, but knowing exactly where it was meant he'd never lose track. He set the canister on the forest floor and slipped away with his lesser hellhounds, moving to a concealed vantage point. He'd learned his lesson. He wouldn't wait around for hours. No sooner had they melted into the trees than the elf appeared, stepping through the birch trunks as if conjured by moonlight. Paula. Ethan exhaled in relief and relaxed the dark crow familiar perched on his shoulder. Dense underbrush and winding ravines would obscure pursuit, but at least they now had a bearing. He signaled to his hounds, and together they plunged after Paula into the mossy gloom. 40 minutes later, the dark crow returned, feathers ruffled and wings heavy, to alight on Ethan's outstretched arm. This time, the familiar had broken off the pursuit before trailing the elf all the way. But it brought back something far more valuable than a tale. A clue to Paula's next destination. Once Ethan fully released the dark crow, it surged forward, its wings beating faster with the help of a brisk tailwind as it silently pursued the elf. But not wanting to startle its quarry, the crow circled back the instant the elf paused and signaled Ethan at once. Guided by the crow's flight path, Ethan made his way toward the elf's location, an encampment set perilously close to the base of a massive iceberg. The moment he stopped, a sudden gust of icy wind rattled him to the bone. Frosty clouds billowed from his lips. He'd been so absorbed in directing the dark crow along the trail that he hadn't noticed the temperature drop. Now, his teeth chattered and his limbs shook uncontrollably. Ethan fumbled for the heavy coat he'd stowed at his side and pulled it on in a hurry. The thick lining enveloped him in welcome warmth, and he couldn't help marveling at how elves, with their otherworldly constitution, seemed barely affected by such brutal cold. "Dual Beast, can you pick up anything?" he asked, exhaling onto his gloved hands and rubbing them together to restore feeling. The mute creature at his side, its eyes glowing a soft blue, tilted its head. Relying on the supernatural sigils Ethan had inscribed within it, the dual beast scanned the surroundings, then gave a measured nod. Ethan squared his shoulders. They were as close as they'd ever been. Now it was time to see what the elf was truly up to. Ethan rode hard after the fleeing elf, determined to recover the glass bottle the creature had tossed away. When they first crossed paths on the frozen road, neither he nor his Griffon companion had sought a fight. Just a quick, magic-laced push to send the elf on its way. Ethan couldn't afford delays. With every mile they covered, the Griffon's enchanted senses grew sharper. Its golden eyes glazed over in concentration, and then, as if guided by some hidden compass, it suddenly pivoted, beak locking onto a precise northern bearing. In an instant, they knew the direction. "That elf can't have gone far," Ethan whispered, heart pounding. If they hurried, they might catch him before he melted away into the tundra. He'd already narrowed his guess to within 10 leagues, but guesses weren't proof, and if this was truly the elf he suspected, Ethan couldn't let uncertainty betray him. He shook off the thrill of anticipation. No celebrations until he had that bottle in hand. 10 minutes later, the Griffon came to a dead halt. Ethan slid from its saddle and dropped to his knees, sweeping aside a thin layer of snow. There it was, the edge of a familiar glass curve, glinting faintly against the pure white. He straightened and looked up at the towering iceberg before, so vast and silent he'd barely realized they'd arrived at its base. Ethan reached out, fingertips brushing the smooth glass. Finally, the bottle was within his grasp. They'd called it an iceberg, but up close it was really a towering rocky mountain, its exposed slopes cloaked in thick snow and ice. At a casual glance you'd swear it was a drifting flow, but a closer look revealed swaths of pine and spruce, their roots clinging to bare stone. At the mountain's base yawned countless fissures and caverns, and by the dull instincts of his dark raven companion, Ethan knew the source of that strange power lay within one of those caves. He strode to the largest opening. A blast of icy wind gusted out, prying at his coat until he tightened every button. He welcomed the cold. This was exactly the sort of place he thrived in, and he was more convinced than ever that the shadowy spirit waited just beyond the threshold. Stepping inside, the air grew sharper, so cold it seared his lungs with every breath. His nose went numb, his eyebrows stiffened with frost. He'd been ready for brutal temperatures, but nothing had prepared him for how bone-chilling this underground world would be. Even the dark raven shivered, ruffling its feathers. If you weren't an elf bred for winter's sting, this cave would feel like a frozen prison. Yet for Ethan, it was only the beginning. Ethan stepped into Laoshan Cave, its tunnel scarcely wide enough for 3 people to walk side by side. Ancient ice coated the floor, treacherous and unpredictable. One misstep could send a man skidding across sharp rock. Fortunately, Ethan had come prepared with specialized crampon boots that bit into the frozen ground, securing each step. Beside him lumbered a massive, barrel-chested beast, hardly built for slick terrain. Concentrating, it channeled its latent psionic energy into a barely visible film around its paws, granting it enough purchase to follow without slipping. As they journeyed deeper, the passage slowly widened and the ice thinned, exposing raw stone beneath their feet. At the cave's mouth, the narrowing walls had funneled a bone-chilling draft, an alley wind, that kept the entrance frozen year-round. But beyond that point, the wind died away into stillness. Without hesitation, the beast gave a silent signal, and Ethan pressed on, carefully muffling each footfall against the rock. Finally, after a few minutes, Ethan caught sight of the elf who'd been staring at him from the shadows, and seemed completely enraptured by his enormous milk jug. The little creature stood barely a meter tall. He was coated in sleek black fur from head to toe, save for one bright red ear, a bushy red tail, and pure white paws and feet. "So it really is you," Ethan breathed, unable to hide his excitement. "Talk about luck." Before him stood Paula, one of the rarest elves in all of Chengdu, and the very spirit Ethan had admired back on Earth in his favorite game. Paula was a dual-type spirit, combining dark and ice attributes. In the gaming world, he'd even earned the title Dragon Slayer. Yet those strengths came at a cost. The fusion of dark and ice left Paula painfully vulnerable. He suffered quadruple damage from fighting-type attacks and double damage from rock, bug, steel, fire, and fairy abilities. In a head-to-head spirit duel at equal levels, just one solid hit could send him tumbling. Ethan grinned. "I've been hoping to meet you in person, Paula. Let's see if you're as formidable in reality as you were online." Chapter 12. The First Commission. Elves possess 18 distinct attributes. Of those, 1 attribute is countered by 4 others, and 5 attributes are each checked by a pair. This intricate system gives elves an extraordinarily wide range of strengths and vulnerabilities. Yet it's precisely this balance, this spectrum of power, that makes them so adaptable and formidable in their own right. Ethan is one such elf. Gifted with a rare distribution of attributes, he finds himself equally capable in magic, combat, and diplomacy. Despite the potential pitfalls, traits that can be overwhelmed by opposing forces, Ethan's versatility offers him unparalleled opportunities. On the battlefield, he can shift tactics on the fly. In negotiations, he can draw on different talents to sway allies or outwit foes. Today, he's about to take on his very first commission, an assignment that will test every facet of his abilities. As he steps into the city's bustling guild hall, a mix of excitement and resolve courses through him. The road ahead may be fraught with challenges, but Ethan is ready to prove that an elf with a broad spectrum of strengths can overcome any obstacle. End of Chapter 12. Chapter 142. The Masterful Hunter. Evil spirits possess a unique trait. They're completely immune to attacks fueled by superhuman powers. In any clash against such forces, they become unstoppable predators. What's more, they enjoy double resistance to ghost, ice, and dark magic, giving them a significant edge in those matchups. For that reason, these elves aren't deployed as frontline attackers in a team. Instead, they shine defensively against special foes like superpowered warriors or even dragons. Paula is the quintessential assassin-hunter elf. She strikes with blinding speed but sacrifices both defense and vitality, classic hallmarks of her class. When she evolves into her Madara form, those very strengths only intensify. From the moment she was born, her path was sealed. Cunning and ruthless by nature, Paula loves nothing more than raiding the nests of wild elves. With a single swipe of her claws, she punctures an egg's shell and siphons its life essence through the tiny breach, leaving nothing behind. Ethan watched the great milk vat in the elves' courtyard with growing fascination. The way the Aoki elves drank from it, lifting their slender cups to sip the creamy liquid, had already captured his curiosity. But it was the scent that truly drew him in, a faintly fishy note, not unlike the aroma of freshly broken elf egg whites. It reminded him of the one treat he couldn't resist. When Ethan had first offered her a taste, Paula hesitated only briefly. She slipped in under moonlight, lifted the corner of the vat's cover, and dared a single sip. The taste was even richer and milder than those egg whites, sweet and cool on her tongue, and she was instantly enchanted. From that night on, Paula made the milk vat her obsession, yet she never approached directly. Life in the wild had taught her caution. To survive, she'd become as silent and patient as a shadow. She would slip into the darkness, conceal herself in crevices, and study the elves' routines for any sign of vulnerability. That same stealth explained why the vat's magical wards never detected her presence. Paula was not flesh and bone, but an evil spirit, and spirits were immune to the elves' superpowered sensors. Tonight, as she crouched behind a low stone wall and savored the sweet aftertaste still lingering on her lips, she sensed a presence. Ethan's footsteps, light but confident, echoed on the paving stones. Instantly, Paula's ears twitched. Her head snapped up, and her eyes gleamed from the shadows, fixed on the figure approaching the milk vat. Ethan slipped the small flask of milk he'd been holding behind his back the instant he recognized who was stepping into the arena. His heart thumped with that familiar tug of protectiveness, yet his outward expression remained composed, eyes flicking over the newcomer's stance. Whatever this trainer appeared to be, Ethan knew better than to judge by appearance alone. With a sharp gesture, the trainer released a burst of light. When it faded, the creature standing before them was nothing short of spectacular. Paula, light gender, male, level 25, type dark characteristic, sharp eyes held item, none genetic moves, bite, frozen fist, boulder, icicle. Fall basic moves, bind, leer, taunt, flash, quick strike, icy wind, false swipe, agility, metal claw, vice grip, tutor moves, shoot down, snatch, low kick. Egg moves, none. Ethan's eyes lit up. A light cyan rank was the highest classification he'd ever seen among the elves. Only his juvenile clamp-tail scorpion even came close. But what thrilled him most were Paula's 3 inherited genetic moves and his dominant ice affinity. That level of frosty power could only mean one or both parents were masters of ice. No wonder the majority of Paula's skills were ice-type attacks. Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. A partner like this would be a game-changer. He squared his shoulders, determination blazing in his gaze. Whatever came next, he knew he couldn't afford to let Paula slip away. Ethan studied the readings one more time. It was undeniable. This familiar had extraordinary talent with the ice attribute. His pulse quickened. "Paula, step into the ring and fight. If you lose, you'll become my elf," he called, barely keeping his voice level. He couldn't hide his excitement. Paula was far too exceptional. A born assassin and masterful hunter, she would be the perfect signature companion for his elf hunter persona. Should he succeed in subduing her, Paula, perhaps alongside Madara, would mark the beginning of his unstoppable rise. He reminded himself that magic here wasn't like the simulations, where an ice spell was a one-off visual effect that faded the moment you ran out of mana. In reality, the ice system offered a powerful secondary benefit: deceleration. By flooding an opponent's body with ice energy, you could slow nerve impulses and dull reflexes. And if you drove the temperature low enough, you could freeze an elf solid. Now it was time to see if Paula could withstand that power. Ethan smirked as he bent the laws of motion to his will, slowing every elf around him while amplifying his own speed until none could hope to outrun his hunt. Then, with a single, crisp command, he spoke into the dim cavern. "Dora!" At his summons, the colossal milk tank, an imposing golem of hardened cream and iron, shuddered to life and lumbered between Paula and the tunnel's narrow exit. Paula's eyes went wide. She hurled back her head and let out a fierce cry. Her 2 hands clamped desperately around the precious glass flasks of nursing milk she'd risked everything to obtain. She pivoted on her heel and darted for the mouth of the cave, but the massive golem was already blocking her path. Heart-pounding, Paula skidded to a halt and backed up until her spine pressed coldly against the stone wall. She held the milk containers protectively behind her back, as if they were the only things keeping her alive. Life in the wild was brutal. Every elf's first thought was always food. Now, threatened and cornered, Paula's grip tightened, her whole being focused on saving those flasks. For a moment, the milk tank hesitated. The sight of Paula clutching her meager rations, so like Zheng Jin in her own weakened state, stirred something deep within the golem's ancient core. A soft, almost sorrowful creak echoed from its joints. It took no blow to dispatch Paula. Ethan's creation had done his bidding. Yet now, confronted with the raw need in her eyes, the milk tank lingered. Ethan watched impassively, his lips curling into a faint, inscrutable smile. His command had been obeyed, but in this silent pause, neither he nor the golem pressed the attack. Paula, still pressed against the rock, dared to meet Ethan's gaze. The danger hadn't vanished, it simply held its breath. Ethan knew that no ordinary bribe could sway a wild elf like Paula. Only something truly precious would tempt him. With a graceful motion, he drew 2 slender glass bottles of milk from the pocket of his ring and placed them exactly 10 paces away. Instantly, Paula's bright elven eyes locked onto the prize. Had Ethan not stationed a dozen of his finest guards behind him, the elf would have pounced without hesitation. "Come on," Ethan called, offering a lopsided grin. "Face me in combat. Beat me, and those 2 bottles of milk are yours. Deal?" To any outside onlooker, Ethan might have looked like a madman dangling treats to lure in a child. But Paula was no naive forest spirit. His lightning-fast reflexes had carried him deep into the human realms in search of sustenance, and there he'd witnessed firsthand the fate of elves enslaved by humans. Born and raised under the oppressive rule of Ono, he had known captivity and misery. He'd eventually broken free and returned to the ancient woods that had raised him. Food was scarce at times, but at least he was free. Now, faced with Ethan's challenge and the promise of those rare bottles of milk, Paula paused. He weighed the risk against the reward. Freedom had always been his greatest prize, but even a wild elf could see had a taste of something so pure. Ethan stared at the 2 bottles of milk in his hands, unable to bring himself to drink it all at once. He hadn't tasted anything this rich and creamy in ages. What was stranger still was the faint, otherworldly energy emanating from the milk. Over the next few days, he barely noticed time slipping by as he sipped it, and with each swallow, his body grew stronger, his fatigue faded, and his wounds mysteriously healed. That's all for tonight's chapter. More updates will roll out throughout the day. Thank you so much for your support. Hibiscus is deeply grateful. If you enjoyed the story, please consider liking, subscribing, or grabbing a monthly pass, and don't forget to recommend us to your friends. For the fastest, pop-up free reading experience, head over to our official site. Chapter 143, Trench. Ethan glared across the barren trench at his stubborn adversary, frustration coiling in his gut. The combined effects of the Pull-Dark system and the Ice system had rendered all his sweeping attacks virtually useless. He paused to reassess. His pull affinity could trap any elf-type foe, but the enemy still wielded a handful of familiar tactics: Dark Raven's flight, the beast's water strikes, the ghost's poison traps. None of those skills were numerous enough to break his pull field, yet one outlier remained completely immune: the gargantuan milk jug units. No matter how hard he pressed, the beast's signature superpower moves stayed stubbornly suppressed. The Raven's dark arts were dulled to mere pinpricks. The ghost's venom proved harmless. Only those massive milk jugs shrugged off his pull, leaving him at an impasse. A spark of recognition lit Ethan's eyes. It was time to dust off the zoological Eye of Miracles protocol. In Zheng Jin's game lore, ordinary beasts could never master that skill. Yet this was reality, not a rigid game engine. With the right techniques and enough ingenuity, anything was possible. As luck would have it, Ethan had already practiced those methods in a past life. Now all he needed was the courage to deploy them. Ethan's previous life. In his past life, Ethan had crossed paths with a quasi-Sky King trainer who was willing to pass on every ounce of his power, provided Ethan paid a steep price. From that master, Ethan learned the fabled Miracle Eye. He'd intended to use it to train a mighty superpowered elf, but fate intervened and he was reborn here before he ever got the chance. Here and now, the mute beast, Paula, must acquire the miracle eye as well. Without it, she'll be woefully outmatched when evil spirits strike. True, Paula still commands water-based attacks, but those are merely a supplement. Her true strength lies in superpowers. Even the incomplete training regimens of elves are wary of her, proof of the threat she poses. Dora. In the end, Paula couldn't resist Ethan's 2 bottles of milk. She had nowhere else to turn. Ethan had sealed off every escape route. If she wanted to live, she had no choice but to accept his terms. The balance of power favored him. In return for sparing her, he would claim those 2 bottles of milk. Ethan carefully uncapped 1 bottle and poured half of its contents into his waiting palm, setting the cap gently on the ground. The creamy liquid glistened in the soft light, every drop a vivid reminder of the bargain they'd struck. Ethan forced a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, I won't touch your milk." Paula's wide-eyed relief tugged at something deep inside him, an ache he couldn't explain. In that moment, he saw a younger version of himself staring back, an orphan, new to this world, with no family, no home. He'd spent his first weeks scavenging through piles of refuse just to stay alive, chased off every time he reached for the tiniest scrap. His only thought then had been to survive, and even that felt impossible until strangers finally found him. Shaking off the memory, Ethan straightened his shoulders. Sentiment wouldn't win battles, and pity wouldn't decide his fate. If he wanted any hope of controlling his own future, he had to be strong, relentless even. He stepped forward, resolve burning in his chest. Paula's trust was a fragile thing, but he couldn't afford hesitation. No matter what it took, whether persuasion or force, he would subdue her. He would emerge the victor. And in that instant, Ethan knew there was no turning back. Ethan's grin widened as he whistled sharply. If one mindless beast can't take him down, send in Shadow Raven, and if that still doesn't do the trick, unleash the Milk Colossus. After all, for a wild elf, deploying a dozen monsters is nothing more than child's play. Paula's eyes flickered with disbelief. "You barreled into my home, challenged me on the spot, and now you expect me to just roll over?" A soft moo drifted through the clearing as the massive milk-white cow named Mimi ambled forward, gently nudging the war-boar Paula aside. Paula snorted in confusion but didn't move. "Dora," Paula snapped, slapping Mimi's broad flank. Though she held no grudge, Mimi's sweet scent was oddly comforting. The cow was one of her own, and right now Paula wanted no distractions. If Ethan wanted a fight, she'd give him one. From the shadows came a low, resonant growl. Dala, the great bear, reared up on her hind legs, her massive forepaws folded unnervingly at her chest. Her eyes locked onto Ethan with a frigid, merciless intensity, like a blade honed to kill. Ethan's voice rang out, calm and commanding. "Shadow Raven, mindless beasts, attack!" Paula outclassed Dark Raven and the foolish beast in both level and base stats. She held clear attribute advantages over them. In a straight fight, defeat was all but certain. Even a 2-on-1 assault might not be enough to topple her. Their only real edge lay in flawless teamwork, and in whatever clever tactics Ethan had prepared by holding that energy barrier in place for so long. Pure numbers didn't tell the whole story anymore. A sudden metallic screech cut through the tension as Paula's 2 front claws began to glow white-hot. She rubbed them together fiercely, each pass sharpening her talons and amplifying her next strike. Grindclaw, Ethan realized. She was boosting both her attack power and accuracy in one lethal maneuver. "Dark Raven, use Snatch!" Ethan bellowed. The black-feathered creature launched itself forward in a flash. Midnight-hued energy crackled around its twin claws as it dove toward Paula. Normally, Grindclaw's speed advantage would have let her complete the move first, but thanks to Raven's prankster ability, its Snatch had absolute priority over status moves. In the blink of an eye, it intercepted and stole the very power Paula had just honed, redirecting her new strength into its own limbs instead. Paula's eyes widened. She'd been outfoxed, her sharpened claws lifted, her advantage snatched away. And in that instant, Ethan's gambit tipped the balance. Ethan felt the whisper in his mind vanish the moment he tried to invoke his claw grind technique. It had failed. Even worse, the Dark Crow's theft of Paula's claws had only energized them, making the talons glow with renewed power. Dark Crow, tailwind formation. Move out, water beasts, fire hydro cannon. Ethan snarled, tugging at his hair in frustration. With a harsh caw, the dark crow beat its wings, and the familiar rush of flight energy crackled across its feathers. This time, Ethan didn't choke off the tailwind effect around himself. He let the gusts wash over every summoned creature. The water beasts, naturally lumbering and awkward in the air, felt only a slight lift, but it was enough to tense their muscles. At Ethan's command, one of the beasts reared up and unleashed a towering jet of water. The column streaked toward Ethan with devastating force. Paula, however, was already on the move. She ducked low, letting the hydroblast roar past her shoulder, and then sprinted forward to reinforce their rear guard. Had Ethan remained in the water's path, the results would have been catastrophic. Instead, he planted his feet, prepared to press the attack before the enemy could recover. It looks like you've only provided a brief note about missing chapters, rather than the actual chapter text. Could you please share the full chapter you'd like rewritten? Once you do, I can transform it into clear, idiomatic English with Ethan as the male protagonist. Mind control the water cannon, you idiot beast. Dark Crow, attack with your wings. Blue arcs of energy ignited in the creature's dull eyes. At its master's command, a compact water cannon formed on its back and unleashed a powerful arc of pressurized water at Paula. Though her defenses rendered superpowers harmless, they still had one use, slowing her down. As Paula twisted to dodge, the returning jet caught her ankle, unbalancing her for the barest moment. Dark Crow vaulted into the air, wings crackling with flight system energy, talons aimed straight for her. Under normal circumstances, no one could evade such a lightning-fast strike. Yet Paula, fast as ever, vanished in a blur of motion. In the space of a heartbeat, a shadowed afterimage flickered where she'd stood. The crow's wings sliced only air. Lightning flash, she thought, landing 15 feet behind her attacker with dagger drawn. The tables had turned. Ethan didn't hesitate. He'd felt the dark energy pulsing beneath the beast's deceptively delicate pinkish skin, an aura no seasoned survivor could ignore. Drawing on years of wilderness combat, he steadied himself and barked out his commands. Shadow Raven, awaken your power. Zola, smash its skull with head hammer. The raven quailed for a moment, wary that its awakening power might spill over and harm Ethan's other companion. But Ethan's unshakable faith in his partner spurred it into action. In an instant, a sphere of crackling yellow energy, laced with flickering blue currents, coalesced before the raven's outstretched wings. At the same time, Zola sprang forward, its jaws stretched wide, strands of inky, silk-like thread knitting together between razor-sharp fangs. Then, snap, Zola unleashed its devil bite, a brutal technique that could cripple even the most formidable foes if it found its mark. Ethan stood his ground, refusing to shelter his summoned beast. Because he'd entrusted the creature with a warhammer, it had learned to fight back, and in return it gave Ethan its complete, unwavering loyalty. Now, a thin veil of mysterious energy shimmered across its smooth pink skull as it swung the hammer upward to meet Paula's strike. There was a muffled crack as hammer met blade, and both the brute and Ethan's other elf, Duran, were blasted backward. The beast let out a triumphant roar, but in truth both it and Duran staggered from Paula's dark magic. Her malevolent spells were devastatingly effective against supernatural powers, and the elves bore the brunt of the backlash. Ethan's expression remained impassive. He'd expected as much. The brute had deliberately held back its binding enchantments. It had a larger strategy in mind. Even so, the cost of restraining Paula's power had been steep. Paula recovered in an instant, her eyes blazing with fury. She lunged at the brute, clamping its skull between her razor-sharp teeth and shaking it violently. Despite the force of her bite, the creature's head barely registered the impact. Unfazed, Paula released her grip and surged forward once more, relentless in her assault. Though she'd taken serious damage, the beast had suffered even more, and Ethan watched, calm and calculating, as the battle raged on. At that moment, the dark raven at Ethan's side finally drew in the swirling awakening power from the air and coalesced it into a glowing yellow orb. The cave brightened instantly under its light. Paula's heart raced with the familiar thrill of combat. She could already taste victory. 2 or 3 more successful bites, she told herself, and the beast would be spent. Hold on, you overgrown brute, Ethan said coolly. Dark Raven, unleash the awakening power. On his command, Paula lunged with her biting skill just as the beast lashed out, its massive limbs curling around her in a vice-like grip. Simultaneously, the Dark Raven launched the energy orb. Paula's jaws clamped against the beast's shimmering green barrier, but the hold kept her from breaking through. Then the orb struck, detonating in a thunderous boom of yellow-blue lightning. Still, the beast's barrier held fast. Guarding against both the razor-sharp bite and the explosive blast, it emerged unscathed, its eyes flashing with undiminished fury. If Paula hadn't reacted quickly, the unleashed power of the electrical system would have wounded her as badly as Ethan's previous stabbing techniques had. Unfortunately, she wasn't so lucky. The core of the awakening force struck her squarely, blasting her 3 meters backward in a violent explosion. Because she'd been sprayed with water earlier, droplets clung to her skin and hair, turning her into a perfect conductor and magnifying the shock. Pale blue arcs of electricity still danced across her body as she staggered upright, a clear sign of how devastating Dark Crow's attack had been. Drawing a sharp breath to steady herself, Paula refused to hesitate. She summoned a soft, ice-blue glow around her twin claws, and within moments, fist-sized shards of frozen rock formed in her hands. With a swift motion, she hurled them skyward at the winged beasts above. Ordinarily, ice attacks would be half as effective against water element elves, but against these airborne creatures, they struck with double force. Even so, a nimble Dark Crow could evade a long-range assault. So Paula focused instead on the lumbering brute she'd wounded earlier, determined to finish it off before it could regroup. Ethan's pulse raced as he faced the 3 sealed runes set into the cavern wall. Unlock just one of them in time, and he might turn the tide. Fail, and he'd lose everything. What he didn't count on was being interrupted. A guttural snarl rolled through the dim light. From a mist-shrouded alcove stepped a sluggish, water-type beast, its sapphire scales rippling with ominous power. "Foolish human," it rumbled. "Awaken, Dark Raven. Strike him down in a single blow." To Ethan's astonishment, the beast's awakening manifested not as water, but as fire. No sooner had it bellowed than it summoned a searing orb of flame. 2 massive boulders, hurled from hidden tunnels above, plummeted toward the beast and Ethan. But before they could connect, the fiery sphere detonated against them, melting stone into a steaming puddle that hissed on the cavern floor. From the beast's flank materialized a great raven, its feathers as dark as midnight. With a low, echoing shriek, the Dark Raven dove straight for Paula, who had been Matt's, and now Ethan's, stalwart companion ever since they descended into this dungeon. Paula braced herself. At her side, 2 elven warriors fell in behind her, abandoning flashy spells for swift, precise sword strikes. Though Paula's own strength outmatched the raven's raw power, she knew better than to underestimate those razor-shaped talons, each one honed by the beast's feral magic. Steel rang against claw as blades and wingbeats collided. Sparks danced in the half-light, and the cavern reverberated with the clash of combat. The elves wove around the raven's strikes, each parry and riposte buying Paula precious seconds. Above them, Ethan's eyes darted between the puzzle before him and the unfolding skirmish. He had to solve that first rune. But the fight lasted only a heartbeat. High in the shadows, the water-fire beast's awakening reached its climax. Flames roiled across its scaled hide, steaming like living waterfalls of fire and water. The temperature soared, and the very air seemed to tremble with unleashed power. Ethan swallowed hard. The raven's shriek faded as it retreated to the beast's side. Paula and the elves stepped back, swords at the ready, faces set in grim determination. The beast's true might had awakened, and so had the real battle for their lives. Ethan, the one they'd long dismissed as the foolish beast, tapped into his awakened power without a moment's hesitation. A blazing orb of fire and energy coalesced in his palm, then shot forward straight at the Dark Crow and Paula. "Dora!" Paula's eyes widened as the flaming sphere hurtled toward them. She could already feel its scorching heat radiating through the air, and panic seized her chest. Worse yet, the Dark Crow omed at Ethan's side, intent on blocking any chance of escape. Would it be caught in the blast too? Were they all about to be consumed together? If only Paula could read Ethan's mind in that instant, she'd know her fears were unfounded. In his calm, determined gaze, there burned just one conviction. This was all far too easy. Chapter 145, Goddess of Dawn. Dark Crow, hold your ground. Ethan tapped into the beast's awakened flame power and leapt into the air, shouting his orders. Below him, Dark Crow was locked in fierce combat with Paula. Sensing the blistering heat of the incoming fireball, the raven shrieked in alarm and spread its wings, bracing for impact. As an ice spirit, Dark Raven, who'd joined the fray alongside Dark Crow, felt the surge of heat even more acutely. Under normal circumstances, he could withstand energy attacks, but this raging inferno threatened to overwhelm his defenses. At that very instant, the blazing orb, fueled by the beast's awakened might, struck the center of the battlefield with a thunderous roar. Boom! Flames erupted outward, showering the cavern with sparks. The sheer intensity of the blast raised the air temperature sharply. Nearby ice formations hissed and cracked as they melted, the water instantly vaporizing into a swirling mist. Steam curled through the chamber, mingling with the echoes of the explosion as the battle reached its fevered pitch. The Dark Crow burst free from the smoke and vapor of the blast, beating its wings as it drifted away. In the center of the explosion crater lay Dora, her hair scorched and her body splayed limply against the ground. Ethan strolled forward, a confident smile tugging at his lips. "Don't pretend to be dead," he called, voice carrying easily across the scorched earth. "I know you're not out of energy yet. Stand up." Most fighters, seeing an opponent down, would rush in, only to risk a fatal dying counterattack. Ethan, however, was watching Dora's status in real time on his chip. He knew that, exhausted though she was, she still had enough strength left for one last strike. "Dora," he repeated, soft enough that only she could hear. She didn't stay down. Groaning, Dora forced her trembling arms beneath her, pushing herself to her feet with unsteady resolve. Ethan's grin widened. He respected her power, but what thrilled him even more was the mental duel they were waging. Brute strength was one thing, outthinking a foe was another entirely. And in that moment, he knew the real battle had only just begun. Ethan had grown up in these wild woods, and he learned early on that brains often win where brawn fails. Evidently, his partner Paula had absorbed that lesson too. "All right, Paula, time for a break," Ethan called, concern softening his tone. "You're worn out, you big dummy. Rest now." He hated to see her overdo it. Even though he could heal her later, driving her beyond her limits today would set back her growth. At his words, Paula let loose an enormous yawn. From her nostrils drifted a single pearly bubble that floated straight toward the yak she'd been battling. "Oh!" Ethan murmured as the bubble made contact with a sharp pop. The yak shuddered, then wobbled as if its strength had been leached away. But Paula herself was paying the price of exertion. A sudden wave of drowsiness washed over her, her legs buckled, and her eyelids drooped under an invisible weight. Through half-closed eyes, Paula glimpsed the bottle of fresh milk Ethan had tucked in the corner, still half full, still untouched. "My milk," she whispered, regret flickering across her face. With a final, tremulous sigh, Paula collapsed onto the mossy ground, utterly spent. Her sleepy bubble attack had been the last straw that broke the yak's resolve. Seizing the moment, Ethan pulled a super ball from his belt and hurled it with steady aim. Ethan stood among the smoldering wreckage of the arena, his Dark Crow perched on one shoulder and the foolish beast panting at his feet. He reached for the super ball, clipped to his belt, pressing the central button. The sphere vibrated violently, its red ring pulsing wildly. Then, with one final flicker, it fell still. The elf champion's prize was secured. Without waiting for the opposing elves to react, Ethan strode across the scorched earth and picked up the now sealed super ball. He'd pulled off the perfect pincer maneuver. The crow had dived in from a sepspove while the foolish beast flanked from the ground, each strike timed to his precise commands. Left to their own devices, even two powerful creatures like his would never have broken through the elves' disciplined defense, but under Ethan's leadership, they had triumphed decisively. He knelt beside his comrades to inspect their injuries. Fortunately, both had escaped with only minor wounds. Ethan unslung a large milk canister from his pack and poured fresh, revitalizing milk into 2 flasks. The Dark Crow's feathers fluffed as it drank, and the foolish beast lapped eagerly, regaining its strength far faster than Zala ever could. From a hidden compartment in his ring, Ethan withdrew 3 vials of healing spray, light, moderate, and heavy duty. He misted each creature from tail to crown, sealing bruises, knitting torn sinews, and instantly easing their pain. Finally, he handed over a handful of compact energy blocks, which they devoured in mere seconds to recharge their reserves. When he rose, both companions were back on their feet, alert and ready for whatever came next. Ethan allowed himself a small, confident smile. Today's victory was his, but tomorrow's challenges would demand even greater skill, and Ethan wouldn't have it any other way. With the milk from the large storage tank, the healing salve, and the energy cube all working together, Ethan had quickly restored the stamina, closed up the wounds, and replenished the energy of every injured dark raven and drowsy beast in the cave. When the last creature stirred back to life, he reached into his pack and pulled out a cricket. By then, Paula had fully come to, though he was still too battered to do more than lie there. The moment he saw Ethan surrounded by raven and beast alike, a flicker of fear, and something more, crossed his eyes. Ethan knelt beside him without a word. He uncorked his finest salve and began treating the worst of Paula's burns, worked to dispel the paralysis, and cleared the blood stasis under his skin. "Dora!" Paula cried out, convinced the cricket, or whatever Ethan held, was some sinister weapon. He tried to push himself up to defend against the perceived threat, but pain seared through him, and he slumped back down. "Don't move! Stay down!" Ethan said, voice firm. He turned his full attention to the treatment, determined to see Paula healed before anything else. Ethan knelt beside Paula and studied her wound with growing concern. This time her injuries were far worse than before. She'd always struggled with a weak constitution, her body barely sustained the rigors of battle, and it was only through sheer force of will that she'd managed to rise and fight after previous defeats. But now, after being overwhelmed, her resolve seemed to have ebbed away, leaving her too frail even to move on her own. Ethan gently sprayed the antiseptic over her gash and activated his skill to draw out the toxins and speed up her recovery. Paula had expected him to step back, and for a moment panic tightened her chest. Then a cool, tingling relief spread through her wounded flesh, and as her numb muscles slowly reawakened, the familiar sting of pain returned. The sudden interplay of soothing chill and sharp ache taught her in one unforgettable instant what it really meant to feel both agony and relief. Just then, the milk tank, an enormous hovering container, glided into the clearing. He settled beside Zola, lifted a bottle filled with creamy white milk, and slipped a straw into its neck. With a silent nod, he offered the straw to Zola, who gratefully began to drink. Paula caught the milky scent on the breeze. Her eyes widened, a tender smile brushed her lips, and tears pooled at the corners of her eyes. She stared at the milk tank as though it were a long-lost friend, her heart suddenly light with hope. Ethan hesitated for a moment, but the creamy aroma of fresh milk was too irresistible. He bit down on the straw, and without another thought, tipped the glass back and drank deeply. The milk was cool and rich, sliding smoothly down his throat. Watching him, Paula's eyes shone with reverent delight. To her, this wasn't just any drink. It was the milk of the goddess of dawn, a sacred elixir she'd been perfecting since morning. She clasped her hands together, almost trembling with pride. "Isn't it divine?" she breathed. "Every drop is pure bliss." Paula turned from Ethan to face her camera. And that, everyone, wraps up day 15 of our live stream marathon. I've owed you this celebration for a while, so thank you for sticking with me. Your cheers and gifts keep me going. I promise I'll repay your kindness soon with some special perks. She flashed a playful grin. Now, who's ready to place the first order tonight? Come on, I need that first tip. Let's get this party started. Regaining her composure, Paula raised the jug of milk high, her eyes sparkling with excitement. To the next 15 days and beyond. Chapter 146, The Wide Mouth of the Milk Can. It was a scene of quiet efficiency. Around the campfire, some of the breeders gently dressed wounds while others offered mugs of warm milk. Ethan himself moved steadily between the two duties, unfazed by the constant flow of injured elves. These breeders' methods were not to be underestimated. Alongside the herbal salves and antiseptic sprays, they applied a sophisticated sequence of massage and pressure techniques that not only sped healing, but also dulled pain and encouraged torn tissue to knit back together. Elves possessed a sturdier constitution than humans, and under Ethan's expert hands, even grievous cuts began to scab over within minutes. Minor lacerations vanished altogether. When the treatment was done, he handed the last patient a fresh bottle from the large milk canister. The elf, pale and weary moments before, now rose unsteadily to his feet and flexed his arms and legs, astonished by how quickly his strength was returning. Paula, standing a few paces away, watched it all in silence. Only now did she fully appreciate the calm authority of this man whom she had once dismissed as unremarkable. It was he, she realized, whose leadership had turned the tide against the Dark Crow and its ferocious beasts. Her expression flickered with respect, curiosity, and something like awe as she met Ethan's steady gaze. Ethan met Paula's gaze without hesitation. "You're already bound to me as my elf," he said. "Like it or not, you have exactly two choices." He paused, then offered the first. Option 1. Embrace your place by my side. I'll train you, protect you, and give you everything you could want. Indulgences like fresh milk, magical trinkets, enchanted foods, anything you crave. At the mention of milk, Paula's stoic mask slipped for the briefest instant, a flicker of longing in his eyes that Ethan noted at once. Despite the elf's iron self-control, that tiny flash told Ethan all he needed to know. There was roughly a 50% chance this offer would win Paula over completely. Then Ethan's expression hardened as he laid out the alternative. Option 2. If you won't fight for me, fine. I won't force you. I'll continue to provide you with every morsel of food you need, but you'll remain sealed inside the elven orb until the day you die. Silence fell. Both paths, pledging loyalty to Ethan or languishing forever in solitary confinement, felt like choosing between life and a living death. Paula's breath caught. The idea of an eternity locked away was unbearable. Paula, a wild elf, prized her freedom above all else. Being stripped of it by a human, Ethan, felt more humiliating than any mortal wound. She refused to accept her captivity. "Dora!" Paula cried, lunging forward in a desperate attack. Even if it meant certain death, she would not back down. In an instant, Ethan's two tamed creatures, the mute hound and the shadow crow, sprang into action, their eyes locked on Paula, ready to subdue her at the first sign of danger. Ethan remained perfectly still, his cool gaze never wavering. As a trainer of uncommon skill, he would tolerate no loss of control. Yet, watching Paula's fierce determination and unbreakable will, he found himself surprisingly impressed. She was exactly the kind of elf he wanted by his side. If he allowed her to fall into another's hands, she might one day become an enemy. Better, he decided, to bind her loyalty to himself. He'd never truly intended to sell her to the Hunters Guild. That idea had only crossed his mind when his coffers ran empty. No, if Paula would fight for him wholeheartedly, Ethan vowed to treat her with respect and earn her allegiance in the bargain. Ethan crouched behind a battered crate, his pulse hammering as the two sides froze in a tense standoff. In that momentary lull, the hulking creature known as the milk tank lunged into the center, cutting off Doolin's frantic gesturing toward Ethan. Clutched in the milk tank's massive hand was a half-empty bottle of milk it had scavenged from a niche in the stone wall. With a delighted rue, Membal, it pressed the bottle toward Hala and cooed, "Me! Me!" Hala stared at the bottle, bewildered, but couldn't help accepting it as the milk tank chattered on. Beside her stood the goblin brute, often derided as the stupid beast, who grinned dully as the milk tank slapped him hard on the back. The blow made him wince, yet he dared not pull away. Perched on a nearby beam, the dark crow ruffled his feathers and tapped the brute's helmeted head with a sharp claw. He recalled how the milk tank had faced down the Aber monster alone not long ago, and felt a twinge of relief that he himself wasn't in the spotlight this time. "Yeah, yeah!" the goblin brute echoed, flapping his arms in forced cheer. Though his voice wavered, he kept up the pretense of enthusiasm, repeating the milk tank's odd, happy chatter as best he could. Paula jabbered on excitedly as she watched the hulking girl, nicknamed Milk Tank by the other students, pound Ethan over and over. Only when she caught the agonized twist of his face did she realize that the two of them had been ganging up on him. But Milk Tank paid no heed. Her blows kept coming harder and faster until Ethan finally wrenched himself free. Suddenly Milk Tank reached the peak of her fury. She raised her fist high above her head and froze, intent on delivering the finishing strike. Terrified, Ethan spun and scrambled backward as fast as he could. "Whoa!" he yelled. With a deafening crack, Milk Tank's fist came crashing down. When her knuckles slammed into the floor, the impact gouged a deep furrow in the tile and sent fine cracks spidering outward. In an instant, the entire courtyard fell silent. Milk Tank blinked at the damage, her shoulders sagging as if she'd forgotten herself. After a moment, she glanced around, cheeks reddening, and mumbled, "Sorry, Mum." Two soft murmurs broke the stillness, one from Paula, frozen with guilt, and one from Ethan, still clutching his side, both too stunned to speak. Chapter 12. Ethan pressed himself against the canyon wall, heart hammering in his chest. He'd only just squeezed through the narrow gap, and the thought of how close he'd come to capture made his knuckles go white. Beside him, Paula glared down the rocky corridor, her sword held loosely in one hand. He'd never admit it, certainly not to her face, but he was grateful she'd been there when he needed someone to watch his back. Standing a few paces away was their teammate, the woman they'd nicknamed the Tank. In the last battle against the aberrations, she'd unleashed a surge of power so intense, Ethan had assumed it was nothing more than the stacking effect of her patience buff. Yet now, at the mere mention of Chase's name, that same raw energy seemed to hum around her again. He still didn't understand the true source of her strength, but he'd learned not to underestimate it. Paula's hostility toward Ethan had softened noticeably. She no longer leveled her blade at him, which was a small mercy, proof that the Tank's presence carried more weight than any of his threats. As the only woman in the group, she commanded respect in ways the rest of them couldn't. A hush fell. Then the Tank stepped forward with surprising poise, placed a firm hand on Paula's shoulder, and gently guided her over to Ethan. He strained to hear what she whispered in Paula's ear. Whatever it was, the effect was instant. Paula's rigid posture gave way, her defiance bleeding out of her eyes until only reluctant compliance remained. Ethan allowed himself a small nod of relief. He'd warned Paula he'd lock her up if she didn't cooperate. An empty threat, of course, but the Tank had achieved the same result with nothing more than a quiet word. Paula stood putty in her grip now, ready to follow orders she'd never have accepted from him. The Tank turned to Ethan, folded her arms, and inclined her head once. Her dark eyes were unreadable, but in that simple gesture, Ethan felt the promise of solidarity. They still had a long road ahead. Chase was missing, and enemies lurked at every turn. But for the first time since they'd burst out of that ambush, Ethan allowed himself to believe they might just pull through together. Ethan held out his hand and tried to pat Dora's head, hoping to ease the tension between them. "Dora," he said brightly. To his surprise, Dora jerked back and ducked out of reach. Ethan's hand froze in midair, an awkward moment stretching between them. Before he could lower it, he unclipped 2 small bottles of milk from the ring at his belt and pressed them into Paula's arms. Paula blinked, caught off guard, but accepted the bottles. Ethan forced a smile, scratched the back of his head twice, and let out a soft laugh. He didn't know what to make of Dora's sudden shyness, but at least the milk might help smooth things over. Author's note: thank you all so much for reading. If you've been enjoying these daily updates, I'd be honored by your continued support. Whether it's a monthly subscription, a recommendation to friends, or just leaving a quick comment to let me know what you'd like to see next. Every bit of feedback keeps me going. I appreciate each and every one of you. Chapter 147, Finding the Little Pig. I've finally managed to subdue Paula. She isn't fully obedient yet, but I'm confident that, given time, she'll settle into the team. Out of all my beasts, Dark Crow, Foolish Beast, Milka the dairy cow, it's Milka who Paula trusts most. Whether it's Milka's gentle nature or the pure, fresh milk she offers, Paula seems to find comfort in her presence. As for me, Paula still eyes me warily. She follows my commands, but I can see the spark of resistance in her gaze. Dark Crow and Foolish Beast haven't exactly tried to curry her favor. Both of them arrived badly beaten by some unknown foe and spent their first days stumbling around in confusion. At first, Paula barely even noticed them. It was only when Dark Crow started flapping around her, demanding attention with shameless persistence, that Paula finally acknowledged his existence. And bit by bit, She's come to accept foolish beast as well. I don't blame her reluctance. After all, I was the one who cornered her, stabbed her to keep her from escaping, and threatened her life if she didn't comply. Expecting instant loyalty would have been asking too much. But I've no doubt that sooner or later, Paula will learn to trust her new place at my side. Ethan never saw himself as the kind of fierce warrior who would shock the elves. Everything had happened gradually. He'd spent the entire day tracking Paola, and though the hunt had been grueling, the result was worth it. Deep inside the ice cave, the sun was nowhere to be seen, but a glance at his watch told him it was already 7 o'clock in the evening, and none of the elves had eaten. In the cavern's chill, they gathered stones and built a makeshift hearth. Ethan retrieved a heavy iron pot, sliced the meat he'd brought down, and added a mix of herbs, spices, and whatever seasonings he had on hand. In minutes, he'd cobbled together a simple hot pot. The fragrant steam curled upward as he arranged platters of sliced meats, fresh vegetables, and homemade dipping sauces around the bubbling broth. Drawn by the warmth and aroma, the elves drifted closer. Paula hesitated at first, her arms folded against the cold, but finally she accepted a spot beside the glowing embers beneath a great ice pillar. Sharing a hot pot in the heart of an ice cave felt surprisingly fitting, and it did more than fill empty stomachs. As everyone dipped ingredients into the simmering broth, the elves' initial reserve melted away. By the time the last morsel was gone, laughter and easy conversation had taken root, and a new sense of camaraderie bound them together far more tightly than any chase through frozen tunnels could have. Ethan watched with a smile as the elves dove into the hot pot he'd prepared. After that first bite, their pace only quickened, and their chatter grew livelier by the minute. When he judged they'd eaten long enough, he scooped up a bowl and joined them. In the chill of the cavern, the steam rising from the pot had turned a frosty grotto into a warm, bustling dining hall. The simple meal had done wonders. Even Paula, who'd once recoiled at the dark crows and the stupid beasts that had attacked him, was now laughing and passing dumplings around. When the last vegetables were claimed, each elf picked up a bottle of fresh milk and settled along the stone wall, swapping stories in 2s and 3s. Meanwhile, Ethan knelt beside the claw-tailed scorpion, Paula's newest companion, and gently tipped milk into its pincers. The creature was still strange to the group, and it had once scuttled bravely up to Paula as if to say hello. That evening they pitched tents inside the cavern and spent Paula's first night with the team. By dawn's light, they were breaking camp and shouldering their packs, ready to resume the search for the elusive small pigs hidden in these underground tunnels. Slinging his pack onto his shoulders, Ethan turned to Mala, the elf who'd lived here longest, and asked, "Mala, after all this time in these caves, have you ever come across one of those little boars?" Ethan's goal in this part of the forest was simple: track down a low-grade wild boar and finish the Hunter Guild's assignment. Meeting Paula had been part luck, part his own determination. When he asked her where to begin, Paula, whom everyone called Para, nodded thoughtfully. She'd lived on the outskirts of this forest for years, and although she rarely paid attention to landmarks, she had an uncanny memory for where to find good food, and today she was eager to share what she knew. "Small boars," she explained, "are everywhere here. They're lazy but clever. They root out berries, nuts, and tubers all season, then drag them back to their dens. Over time, they build up enough stores to gorge themselves for days without moving at all." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You mean every time we stumble across a boar's stash, we've basically found a food cache?" "Exactly," Paula smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That sweetness you tasted earlier, completely thanks to those pigs. Nobody knows how they manage those massive hordes. They're solitary by nature. So every boar den you discover is a random stroke of luck. And don't let their size fool you. Some of these small hogs can put up quite a fight." Ethan hefted his spear, excitement sparking in his chest. A ready food supply and a completed mission were both within reach. With Paula leading the way, he strode deeper into the underbrush, alert for the signs of a hidden boar lair. Ethan followed Paula's lead into the heart of the ice cave. He knew that if they merely skirted past the wild boar piglets, nothing would happen. But once those little hogs sensed their food was at risk, they could turn vicious in an instant. In these frozen tunnels, where the cold cut through armor like a blade, Paula's local knowledge was invaluable. She already knew every hidden nook where piglets burrowed, saving Ethan hours of blind searching. For 2 hours, they wound their way through a maze of glittering stalactites and icy passageways. At every turn, Paula paused to listen for the telltale snorts or the faint clatter of hooves on ice. When they did stumble onto a litter, it seldom met Ethan's requirements. Some were too small, others too skittish, and a few bore the scars of an angry mother's attack. Frustration never crossed Ethan's face. Getting lost in these twisting caverns would have been far worse, and he trusted Paula to guide him safely. After another hour of careful tracking, Paula held up a gloved hand and pointed down a narrow corridor choked with frosty stalagmites. "This way," she whispered. Ethan crouched low, pressing his back against the cold wall. The air here grew colder, and the silence more oppressive. Then they heard it, a soft, rhythmic grunting from deeper within the cavern. Paula motioned him forward, and Ethan crept along the ice, breath visible in short puffs. Rounding the corner, he found them, a litter of young boars, their coarse bristles coated in rime, eyes sharp with curiosity and defense. But only one was what Ethan had been looking for. It stood apart from the rest, broad-shouldered, alert, and unflinching under his gaze. This piglet matched all of Ethan's criteria. He signaled to Paula, who nodded approvingly. For the first time that day, Ethan felt the spark of excitement. They'd finally found their quarry. Ethan tapped his Pokénav screen to review the data on the wild small pig before him. Species, small pig, dark yellow variant, gender, female, type ice ground. Characteristic, sluggish inherited moves, ice cone, mud shot. Learned moves, tackle, takedown, powder snow, mud slap, ice fang, mud bomb, hail TM. Move, rock slide, invisible rock. Her dark yellow qualification and current level perfectly matched the requirements for Ethan's hunter assignment. All he had to do was catch her. He didn't hesitate. Squirtle, water gun. With a determined bul-bul, Squirtle unleashed a high-pressure jet of water. The stream hissed through the frigid air and struck the snow-packed ledge where the small pig grazed. A spray of ice crystals scattered across the ravine. The small pig paused, shook her head once, and then, utterly unconcerned, resumed nibbling tufts of grass beneath the frost. Slow by nature and unbothered by humans or Pokémon alike, she seemed to assume these strangers had come merely to admire her. Ethan allowed himself a grin, calm before the catch. He reached for a Pokeball. The hunt was nearly over. Ethan didn't even have time to react before a roaring torrent of water burst into his den, flooding it in an instant. "Porridge!" he cried out, panic rising in his throat. "Remember to collect your monthly tickets." Chapter 148, Searching for the Great Rock Serpent. Ethan watched in amusement turn to shock as the little boar, usually so easygoing, erupted in fury. Its placid nature had never been a sign of weakness. Here in the ice caverns, its raw strength was off the charts, otherwise it couldn't have been lugging that massive supply cache on its back. With a deafening snort, the boar thundered out of the crystalline pool, eyes flashing with indignation as it fixed its glare on the hapless beast beside Ethan. "Idiot! Fire the water jet again, full power!" Ethan barked. At his command, the creature reared its head and unleashed a concentrated column of water. But this time, the stream was sheathed in a faintly glowing shell of raw energy. The effect was immediate. The jet's velocity doubled, its impact intensified by an entire grade, and Ethan could even subtly adjust its trajectory mid-flight without any loss of force. The little boar planted its hooves and braced against the oncoming blast. It felt the surge of water energy coursing toward it, and as a proud ice elf, it instinctively recoiled. Water energy was its greatest aversion, and this supercharged jet threatened to crack its very essence. Yet the boar refused to back down. Its breath steamed in the frigid air as it steadied itself for the collision, determination blazing in its eyes. Ethan's tail bristled, his fur rippling as he exhaled a blast of fine, snow-laden air. Summoning his freezing wind ability, he sent the icy gale hurtling toward the oncoming water gun. In the depths of this ice cavern, where the ambient cold amplified his ice powers by nearly 30%, Ethan knew he had the advantage. Already, he could see the dumb beast's water stream foaming and frosting at the edges, its force visibly weakening. Confident, Ethan pressed the assault, only to watch the creature's eyes glow an electric blue. With a sudden guttural roar, the dumb beast reconsolidated its power, solidifying the water blast into a high-pressure lance. Before Ethan could react, the frozen spear slammed into his side like a jagged arrow. Pain seared through his flank, and he staggered, teasing, his hind legs buckling against the icy floor. "Arr!" he howled, every nerve alight with agony. But the dumb beast wouldn't relent. Its maw opened wide in a triumphant snarl, and it lunged again, eager to finish what it had started. Despite the pain, Ethan forced himself to stay on his feet, knowing that in this frozen cavern, a single mistake could cost him far more than a bruised rib. Without hesitation, Ethan unleashed a series of water jets infused with his superpower. The small boar, slow, with only average defenses, never stood a chance. Bombarded by the enhanced water blasts, it couldn't mount any effective counterattack and collapsed almost immediately. By channeling his energy into the streams, Ethan doubled their cutting force against the creature's ice-hardened hide. There was never any real suspense. These forest boars weren't top-tier foes, so he felt no pressure at all. With a single throw, he confined the fallen beast in an ordinary elf orb, then applied a healing salve to ensure it survived its wounds. Paula watched from a short distance, her gaze fixed on Ethan's calm efficiency. The ease with which he dispatched the boar, and the gentler way he treated her, felt strangely comforting. Though she couldn't quite explain why, a small smile warmed her heart. With the immediate threat neutralized, Ethan turned away from the cave entrance. He chose not to press deeper into the icy depths, instead stepping back to discuss their next move with Paula. Ethan stomped through the deeper chamber of the ice cave, teeth chattering. Even his insulated down jacket offered little comfort against the relentless chill. Around him, the elves fared differently. Their natural body fat kept most of them warm, and Paula, long acclimated to these frozen tunnels, strode ahead as if on a summer's stroll. But Dark Crow, whose wings were already beginning to stiffen, hovered unsteadily at Ethan's side, feathers dusted with frost. Watching them shiver, Ethan paused to think. If the cold would sap their strength anyway, why not turn it into an opportunity? He barked out a quick series of drills, sprints between ice pillars, push-ups on slick stone, wing beats in place, and pressed the elves through each exercise. The effort burned more calories, but by the end of that makeshift workout, even Dark Crow's resistance to the cave's frigid aura had visibly improved. He mentally checked it off. Ice skill resistance up by 1 level. With their bodies glowing from exertion, the group began their retreat toward the entrance. Ethan glanced back at Paula. "Do you know the trail the great stone serpent uses to patrol this cavern?" Paula shook her head, brushing a stray lock of hair clear of her frost-tipped ears. "I'm well versed in these ice tunnels and the forest right outside, but anything beyond that lies outside my usual routes. This territory spans leagues. I can't explore it all in a day." Ethan nodded. The cave network was far too vast for any single guide, yet they had what they needed: improved toughness, clear directions for the next leg of their journey, and the resolve to push on, no matter how deep the cold. Ethan glanced back at the ice cave's entrance. Without any trail left by the giant rock snake, and with Paula unable to help, he had no choice but to abandon the search. The biting cold of the cave had seeped into his bones. Stepping back into the open air, he welcomed the milder, if still frigid, mountain breeze. He flexed his fingers and toes, letting the circulation return, then slipped the large milk canister into the elven orb on his belt. Now that the ice cave was behind him, Ethan set his sights on the rocky slopes above. This craggy terrain was prime territory for a creature made of stone and scale. He planned to spend the rest of the afternoon, and tomorrow morning if necessary, scouring every crevice and ledge for signs of the beast. If he came up empty-handed by then, he would have to put the hunt on hold. He couldn't afford to squander time. Shadow's mission was still in limbo, and whispers of a League assault on the rocket base had been growing louder. No one knew exactly when the attack would come, but Ethan suspected it would be soon. Every moment he spent up here now was a moment not spent preparing for war. Stepping carefully onto the winding mountain path, Ethan threaded his way between jutting boulders and loose stones. One misstep could send him tumbling down the slope. He scanned the skies for dark crows and kept an ear out for the grunts of territorial beasts, but neither birds nor brutes troubled him this afternoon. With the path clear, Ethan pressed onward, eyes alert for the slightest hint of the great rock serpent's passage. Ethan pressed deeper into the rocky foothills, flanked by two elven guardians, one who soared overhead on silent wings, the other Zala, who bent the earth itself to her will. Zala knew this terrain like the back of her hand, and between the two of them, she was without question the fleetest of all the elves. Along the winding path, they passed patrols of small boxing stones and low rumbling boulders. These living rocks paid the travelers little heed, settling back into their slow grazing as Ethan and his escorts went by. To them, the mountains themselves were a banquet, each mineral-rich outcropping a feast. Here and there they also spotted burrowing gophers and thieving trekking mice. The gophers skittered into their tunnels without so much as a glance, but the mice proved bolder. They swarmed in packs, attempting to overwhelm the party. A few of Ethan's companions scattered to safety, but most fell to the rodents' vicious onslaught. Despite the mountain's vast expanse, no trace of the great stone serpent, Ethan's quarry, revealed itself. He sent his dark crow circling high above, trusting its keen eyes to spot the serpent even amid the densest jumble of scree. But time after time, the crow swept the heights and returned empty-taloned. A creature of such scale should not have eluded its vigil, and yet it had. Ethan felt a surge of impatience and helplessness as the wind whispered through the crags. The serpent was here somewhere, but for now it remained as elusive as shadow in moonlight. All Ethan could do was hope they would face the great stone serpent somewhere. The dark raven's gaze couldn't find them. Night was falling. The sky grew heavy with dusk as the sun dipped below the horizon in a final glow of crimson and gold. Ethan guided the elves to a nearby rock outcropping and found a narrow cave whose smooth floor and dry walls made it surprisingly hospitable. A brief inspection and a few makeshift repairs turned the hollow into their camp for the night. Author's note: this is today's third revision. Remember, I promised 4 revisions each day after the first, and I'll see it through. The 4th update may come a bit later. If you enjoy the story, please consider supporting me with a monthly subscription, recommendation tickets, or any other reward you like. Your support helps me deliver the fastest possible updates. Thank you for reading. Chapter 149, Unexpected Discovery. Before the first light had fully chased away the stars, Ethan was already awake. Pale dawn filtered through the eastern windows as he moved quietly through the small kitchen, laying out plates of steaming porridge, freshly baked rolls, and a tall glass of chilled milk at each place. Once everything was in order, he slipped from door to door, gently rapping on each frame to rouse the elves from their slumber. Most of them stirred without complaint, slipping from their beds and padding down the hallway. Paula alone remained motionless. Though she'd woken at Ethan's first stirrings, she'd said nothing until the second knock. Then, almost automatically, she rose, as if some deeper part of herself were learning to accept this new routine. Inside, however, her thoughts were uneasy. A voice in her head warned her that Ethan couldn't be trusted, yet her body betrayed no sign of protest. The warm, savory aroma of breakfast beckoned her forward. The sight of her friends already seated at the table urged her on. With a shy intake of breath, Paula found herself moving to her place alongside them. She stared down at the neatly arranged dishes, her stomach tightening in anticipation. She longed to dive right in, but no one else had started eating, and so she forced herself to wait. Patience, she reminded herself, was as important as courage. Ethan smiled and said, "Dig in, everyone." From the corner of his eye, Yuguang caught the elves shifting nervously in their seats. The moment Ethan gave the go-ahead, they attacked their breakfast with gusto, some shoveling food in at lightning speed, others savoring each bite. Ethan scratched his head halfway through, but the elves were so focused on the meal they didn't even notice him. Their simple, earnest nature was on full display. Once breakfast was over, they set off again in search of the rock snake. Today's foray was Ethan's last chance. If they hadn't spotted the massive serpentine spirit by lunchtime, they'd have to call it quits. Rather than pressing uphill, they fanned out along the mountainside on a horizontal sweep, giving themselves plenty of time to return if nothing turned up. It wasn't long before local spirits, mostly rock and earth types, rose to challenge Ethan. But with his water element summons, he dispatched them effortlessly. Rock spirits may boast formidable defenses, but they're notoriously weak against water energy, and Ethan's beasts broke through their stony hides in no time. Ethan crouched at the mouth of the cavern, watching his Dolmon with a mixture of pride and relief. After dispatching wave after wave of rock and ground-type elves, his partner had just gained enough experience to reach level 25, tying it with Baula as the strongest Pokémon in his stable. Finding a spot this rich in XP was rare, and even though the colossal rock serpent he'd chased all afternoon had eluded him, Dolmon's level up made the outing worthwhile. They'd scoured the rocky ridges for nearly 2 hours when the dark crow, Ethan's ever-vigilant scout, perched on a boulder ahead and let out an excited caw. It swooped low toward a narrow fissure in the cliff face. At the entrance, deep gouge marks scored the stone, as if some immense creature had dragged itself out recently. "Dolmon, cover the cave mouth with water jet," Ethan ordered, leaning back to study the opening. There was a good chance the rock serpent lurked inside, but it wasn't certain. Those claw marks were the only clue. Dolmon's throat swelled as it inhaled. Then, with a powerful exhalation, a pressurized column of water shot into the darkness. The blast struck the cavern wall, sending droplets sparkling back into daylight, and revealing how deep the tunnel really was. Ethan felt a thrill of anticipation. Whatever lived down there wouldn't stay hidden for long. Ethan and the elves had been carried along the rushing water column for some time when a soft, steady drip sounded ahead. He halted at the cave's mouth, listening intently. Faint, irregular noises drifted from deep within the darken, growing closer with each passing second. Ethan frowned. If this were a stone serpent, its approach would be heavy and deliberate, and it didn't sound like a spirit dragging itself across the floor. It sounded more like metal scraping stone, like a tire grinding on rock. Before he could voice his warning, a flat blue-gray cylinder shot into view, screeching as it skidded across the cavern floor. Ethan's pulse spiked. "Everyone, get clear." He dove behind a jagged outcropping, hauling the nearest elves down with him. The cylinder ground to a halt in a cloud of dust just outside the entrance, the very same mysterious device Ethan had glimpsed before. Now, whatever lay ahead was no longer a rumor in the dark, but a rolling threat at their heels. "Cool." Ethan watched as the blue-gray cylinder came to a halt. In an instant, a hulking figure over 1 meter tall emerged. From either side of its broad snout sprouted 2 thick ivory tusks, and its body was sheathed in a carapace that ran from tail to nose in overlapping plates of dark blue. Only 2 small, beady eyes peeked out from beneath that armored shell. For a moment, Ethan had half expected a cave to house some kind of massive rock serpent, but this was far more impressive. This was a Chengdu Dungia, the fully evolved form of the baby elephant species. He checked his Pokénav at once. Pokémon, Dungia, color variant, light green, gender male, level, 25 type ground, characteristics strong held item none. Genetic moves, mud throw, gas gathering, Tarzan spin. Basic moves, flame tooth, lightning tooth, angle collision, stomp, scream, circle, high-speed spin, roll, vicious chase, shoot down, pound. TM moves, iron wall, invisible rock, roadblock, egg moves, none. A level 25, light green Dungia. Ethan's eyes widened. Most of the wild Pokémon he'd run into so far had been only yellow-rated. Encountering a green-rated specimen here was well beyond anything he'd dared hope for. Ethan's eyes narrowed as the hulking golem in front of him shifted, clearly a freshly evolved level 25 Tetsuko. That was good news. Although creatures of its type could learn the devastating earthquake skill at level 30, this one hadn't reached that stage yet. If it had, a single Tier 10 Tremor Blast could have triggered a Magnitude 10 quake, bringing down the entire cavern on them. Because it lacked that ability, the golem was still worth a small fortune. Ethan planned to finish it here, loot its remains, and turn the bounty in at the Hunters Guild, enough reputation points to push him further up the ranks. The beast had no idea it was about to become a walking payday. "Paula," Ethan called over his shoulder. His elven companion sprang into position on his left flank, summoning her raven familiar with a graceful flick of her staff. "Keep its attention. I'll start us off." She answered with a nod. Ethan raised his own staff and barked, "Water cannon!" A crystalline jet of water shot across the cavern, striking the golem's armored shin plates. The monster staggered as torrents of liquid washed over its joints, rustling cracks in its thick shell. Dark Crow, winds of blessing. Paula's raven let out a piercing caw. A sudden gust whipped through the chamber, loosening gravel from the ceiling and rattling the golem's carapace. Seizing the moment, Ethan shouted, "Frostwind!" Blue-white tendrils of icy air erupted from his staff, whipping around the golem's legs and freezing the ground beneath it. Cracks spread across the creature's joints as the cold seeped into every seam. The dread beast bellowed in rage and pain, stumbling as it struggled to shake free. Ethan didn't give it a chance to recover. He advanced, ready to unleash the next volley and claim the reward that would cement his reputation at the Hunters Guild. Chapter 1. First Day on the Job. Ethan leaned forward, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Although his reflexes felt a touch sluggish, his mind remained razor-sharp, quickly parsing every line of code and anticipating the next move. By sunset, he'd already completed 4 major refactors, a solid showing for his very first day. Yet celebrating felt out of reach. Across the dimly lit room, unpaid bills stacked higher than his confidence, and sleep was a distant luxury. Even now, exhaustion tugged at his eyelids, but the pressure of those debts kept him glued to his chair. One more bug fix, he told himself. One more adjustment. With a weary sigh, Ethan added the final semicolon to his latest patch and hit submit. He stretched, cracking his knuckles, then glanced at the clock. Midnight. Not quite enough hours to rest, but plenty more to keep coding. He allowed himself a small, wry grin. For this kind of grind, I deserve a break, and maybe a little support. In his mind's eye, he pictured a flood of monthly pass subscriptions, recommendation tickets piling up, readers cheering him on. If he could conjure that momentum, it would carry him through the long nights ahead. Closing his eyes for just a moment, he made himself a promise. No annoying pop-ups, lightning-fast updates, and all the improvements a developer could pack into one project. Sleep could wait. For now, Ethan had code to conquer, and debts to erase. Chapter 150. Give Up Looking. Ethan watched as his teammates sprang into action, each one benefiting from the residual effect of Dark Raven's trickster heart, a game mechanic that, here in the real world, functioned just as it did in the virtual arena. It granted priority to transformation moves. The swirling energy from his own Tailwind skill had already accelerated the entire squad. They moved with surprising lightness. From the edge of the circle, the stunner raised his weapon, an experimental water cannon. Its large barrel rattled ominously. Normally the cannon was too slow to land a decisive blow, but tonight, with Dark Raven's trickster heart and Ethan's Tailwind buff fortifying his performance, the stunner's movements felt sharper, more precise. Ethan gave him a quick nod. He spread his hands wide, summoning the chill wind, a gust of frigid air that cut through the humid night like a thrown dagger. He didn't aim the blast directly at their armored opponent, Dungia. Instead, he carefully guided it toward the stunner's water cannon, where the icy currents swirled around the barrel in thin, crystalline eddies. Under the influence of the freezing wind, the water in the cannon didn't lock solid. Ethan wanted the weapon to fire freely, but it crystallized just enough to form tiny ice shards within the stream. It was a risky hybrid of water and ice energies, untested in live combat. Yet even in its imperfect state, the effect went far beyond his expectations. "Let's see how you handle this," the stunner called, pulling the trigger. A torrent of water and glittering ice shot toward Dungia. Flecks of miniature, razor-sharp boulders rattled through the stream, churning into a swirling, icy slurry. Dungia's heavy ground armor, designed to shrug off kinetic impacts, was caught off guard. Twice over, the hybrid blast hammered into his shell, the combined elemental assault overwhelming its defenses. Dungia bellowed, a raw, furious roar, as the supercooled water seeped into every joint of his armor. Steam hissed off the cold metal as the ice tightened like a vice. His crimson eyes flashed with rage, and he staggered under the double assault of water and ice. Ethan and his team held their positions, braced for Dungia's counterattack. For a moment, everything was still but for the hiss of melting ice. Then, with a furious snarl, Dungia lunged forward, his massive form shaking off the frostbite pain and charging back into the fray. Ethan steadied himself. "Keep pushing," he shouted. "Don't let up." The battle was only beginning. Ethan slept deeply in the cave, but late that morning a sudden jet of icy water splashed him squarely in the face. Startled, he bolted upright, convinced an elf had slipped in to ambush him. When he found no one else inside, frustration welled up, and he stormed out to vent his rage. Barely 10 steps from the entrance, a second, colder torrent struck him, this time laced with pebbles and splintering rock. That was the last straw. Fury boiled over in Ethan's chest. He exhaled 2 thunderous breaths from his long snout and stamped his front hooves so hard the ground shivered and dust billowed around him. Without a word, he curled himself into a perfect spiked sphere. His bristly hide hardened like an iron tire, and his massive tusks, thick as spearheads, jutting from either side, warned anyone who dared approach. Then he launched himself forward. He had activated his rolling skill. At first, its momentum was modest, but with every revolution, it grew more powerful, doubling in strength as he spun faster and faster. By the time he reached full speed, the force backing his charge reached a staggering 480 points. Any spirit unfortunate enough to stand in his path would be struck cleanly by that final, crushing roll. Ethan watched the enemy suit engage its spin protocol. Ordinarily, you can't simply chain a rolling maneuver with the cyclone charge. Yet the Qian family of Manjin City, whom Ethan had long admired and envied, had mastered just that. By activating the roll immediately after the charge, they doubled the skill's output to a jaw-dropping 960 points. It was the stuff of legends. No sooner had Dunton Jia's armor locked into its rolling cycle than it trampled forward like a rampaging bison. Ethan scowled. He had no respect for those hulking earthbound elves who depended on brute strength rather than cunning, and neither did his own elven squad. Beating a lumbering foe felt more like shooing off a gentle giant than earning a true victory. He held his ground and began weaving his spells. Hydrojet, concentrate your force, soak every joint in that armor. Icewind, seal his path and sap his speed. Shadow Raven, unleash a surge of darkness and throw his balance into chaos. Ethan resisted the urge to launch his rolling golem. Its systems were only just warming up. The power output was modest for now. Once the spins accelerated, guiding its trajectory would become nearly impossible and far too risky. Better to strike with precision than let raw force run wild. A cold wind howled down from the throat of Tongla. To synchronize with the mute beast's water cannon, I held back the freezing gale's full might. Instead, I channeled my ice energy into a focused blast aimed at slowing the rolling armor. The juggernaut wasn't exactly swift to begin with, and under Zala's chill breath, a thin glaze of frost crept over its surface, eating away at its speed. Meanwhile, Dark Raven unleashed his malevolent wave technique, not to strike the armor directly, but to rip up the ground around it. Jagged furrows formed beneath the beast's path, further sapping its momentum. At that moment, Ethan guided the mute beast into position as the team's primary damage dealer. Rather than firing the water cannon head-on, he used his psychic gift to shape and contain the torrent. The pressurized water didn't lash out, it curled around the rolling fortress, trapping it in a liquid snare. In an instant, the armor's wheels ground to a halt. Enveloped by Ethan's controlled deluge, the behemoth ceased rolling and spluttered helplessly, as if drowning beneath its own momentum. Ethan watched with a cold amusement as Dunjia's face flushed and his breath came in ragged gasps at the center of the churning water pillar. "Freeze him again," Ethan ordered, a cruel smile tugging at his lips. "Let him know true ice." At Ethan's command, Tongla nodded and drew upon his ice magic. The beast at his side lunged into the water swirl, sending sheets of liquid spiraling around Dunjia's armored form. Within seconds, Tongla's spell crystallized the torrent into a single, massive ice block. Dunjia's body went rigid, only the glassy stare of his eyes betrayed any spark of life. Ethan could not help but respect the elf's endurance. Though Dunjia's kin were notoriously vulnerable to water and frost, he'd held out long enough to twist his pupils in defiance. After a measured pause, Ethan gave the signal to shatter the ice. A handful of elven warriors stepped forward, cracking the block into jagged shards. When the final piece fell away, Dunjia lay on the ground, his armor fractured, chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Ethan knelt, produced an elf ball from his belt, and whispered, "Time to claim you." He flipped the switch on the sphere. It snapped open, engulfing Dungia in a swirl of scarlet light. With a soft click, the capture was complete. "Leave him in the sun for a while," Ethan instructed. "Let his strength return before we secure him in the vault." Then he turned away, already planning his next move. Ethan's successful capture of the light green-grayed Dungia had changed his priorities. Wrangling a big rock snake had once been his top goal, but now that he possessed a far rarer creature, he felt no real loss even if he failed to find one. 2 hours of combing the rocky slopes brought him back empty-handed. Satisfied he'd given it a fair shot, yet unwilling to waste more time, Ethan conceded defeat. "Maybe I'll run into one farther down," he told himself, turning toward the trail. Leading the small band of elves downhill, he discovered something surprising. Descending was far more treacherous than climbing. Loose gravel made every step a gamble. It was easier, he realized, to push his weight uphill against the stones than to keep from slipping on the way down. At first, he soldiered on, determined to make them earn their progress, but the pace was agonizingly slow. Finally, Ethan relented. He called over his brute of a beast companion and allowed it to use its gift. With a few powerful sweeps of its limbs, the creature flattened the path into a gently sloping track. The improvement only shaved minutes off their journey, but it felt like a godsend. Normally, Ethan avoided relying on such supernatural assistance. He wanted the elves to build strength and skill, but he had to admit this small concession was well worth the time saved and the scrapes prevented. With the new path beneath their feet, the descent became more manageable, and Ethan led his party on toward whatever awaited them in the valley below. Ethan had noticed that his elves' growth had sped up recently, but his own fitness wasn't keeping pace. Determined not to become a liability in the wilderness, he pushed himself harder with every step, and gradually his pace improved. About halfway down the mountain, the crackle of magic reached his ears, followed by urgent human commands. Elven spells fizzled through the air, and a clear, feminine voice barked orders. "Trainers out here?" Ethan slowed, curiosity piqued, as he crept toward the sounds of combat. Chapter 151, Dispute. Ethan never expected to encounter another trainer this far off the beaten path. Still, her confidence and the fierce battle she'd unleashed made it clear she knew exactly what she was doing. Motioning to his Pokémon, he had them fan out and soften their footsteps, closing the distance as silently as possible. As he crept forward, a powerful roar rolled through the canyon, followed by the grinding crash of gravel and shattered rock tumbling down the mountainside. Then a sharp, commanding voice cut through the noise. "Roselia, use Stun Spore." Through the swirling dust, Ethan at last made out the scene. 2 colossal rock-type serpents, each nearly 30 feet long, had coiled themselves across the steep slope, crushing the loose stones and flattening the terrain beneath their immense weight. Chunks of rock and rubble lay strewn in every direction, but the titanic onyx showed no sign of faltering. Between them stood a young woman, her dark hair wrapped in a crimson turban. At her side danced a small, emerald-green Pokémon whose petals glowed with latent energy. "Paralysis powder, Roselia," the trainer commanded, voice steady. Roselia thrust its tiny hands forward, releasing a shimmering cloud of spores. The powder drifted like glitter through the air, poised to entangle the nearest onyx in paralyzing slumber. Ethan's heart pounded. He had stumbled into a high-stakes battle, and he couldn't wait to see whose Pokémon would prevail. Ethan's breath caught as he surveyed the petite grass-type Pokémon before him. Her body was a pale, minty green, her torso draped in lush leaves that fell like a flowing dress, and 3 slender thorns crowned her head. Bright yellow markings brushed her chest, and she clasped a bouquet of blue roses in one hand and red roses in the other. At the command of the girl in the red turban, the Pokémon expelled a few glistening droplets from her mouth. Instantly, 2 roses burst into bloom above her, scattering a fine lilac dust that coiled through the air and curled around the 2 massive rock serpents closing in on them. Though the paralysis powder she'd unleashed was a grass-type technique, it nevertheless seeped into the serpents' rocky hides, sapping their speed even as their enormous forms remained unbroken. Ethan watched without surprise or panic. He wove across the rough gravel with effortless agility. Stones and rubble posed no obstacle to him. He had faced far tougher terrain than this in his journeys. Poison Rose, Magic Leaf, Dream Monster, Strange Light. The girl barked each command in turn, her voice clear and unhesitating. As she spoke, a dream demon materialized from the shadows. Unfurling its dark wings, it lobbed a small, glowing orb of strange light directly at the nearest rock serpent. Ethan braced himself for the explosion of color and sound, ready to strike at a moment's notice. Ethan watched as the poisonous rose echoed the girl's movements, its stem whipping back to crush two of its own blossoms. Clusters of leaves, illuminated by lilac magic, shot forward and struck the nearest rock snake. At the same moment, the girl unleashed her creeping vines technique, binding the colossal serpent 4 times in rapid succession. The creature writhed in pain but managed to shake free and press onward. With one rock snake engaged by the dream monster, the girl turned her full attention to the poisonous rose while directing Ethan to deal with the other serpent. Yet amid the frenzy, that last rock snake lunged blindly and charged straight at Ethan. "She's strong," the girl growled, "but she can't hold both of them long enough for you to summon your familiar. And that rock snake is exactly the elf you need for your hunter quest. It just walked right in front of you. Don't let it get away." Ethan squared his shoulders. The once elusive serpent now stood before him. Though it was only a yellow-tier creature at level 3, it still satisfied his quest's requirements. Clenching his staff, he snarled, "You stupid beast! Water cannon!" Awaken Ghost! A massive rock serpent, a spirit of both earth and stone, rose, its power quadrupling against any water or grass attacks. The agile girl, still tangled in its coils, froze when Ethan suddenly appeared. His elves darted forward, launching an all-out assault on a second rock serpent, and the air around them turned icy. Jiao's shout rang out, "Stop! That's my aunt's prey!" The girl struggled in the serpent's grip, unable to break free. She watched Ethan with clenched jaw as his beasts and spirits pressed their attack. He snorted in disdain, urging his forces on mercilessly, while the dark raven circled overhead, keenly observing the fight below. With only 2 elves at her command, the girl looked cornered, though no one could be certain if she harbored some hidden ally, perhaps a dream demon like the one that had vanished moments earlier. In a matter of heartbeats, both hunters subdued their monstrous quarry. Ethan swept up his capture orb, sealing the giant rock serpent within. The girl, slightly faster, had already pocketed hers, her skill at gathering spirits into fairy spheres plain for all to see. Ethan stepped forward and, without a moment's hesitation, slipped the small elven sphere into his pocket. The girl in front of him exploded with anger. "Hey, you rude! Give that back! It's mine!" At her shout, 2 elves, Poison Rose and Meng Yao, materialized at her side, their eyes blazing as they glared at Ethan and the faint silhouette of his own summoned elves behind him. Ethan didn't flinch. He clicked the sphere's clasp shut, secured it in his pocket, and casually faced the girl. Up until now, he'd only seen her from behind, a scarlet bandana tied around her head, a fitted denim jacket, and slim-cut jeans. Now, meeting her gaze, he realized she was much younger than he'd assumed, barely older than a teenager. He raised an eyebrow. "Hunter?" The word hung in the air, and the girl blinked in surprise. She hadn't spoken yet, but her furious scowl faltered. Ethan let his question linger, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. In truth, he already knew the answer. He could see it in her stance, in the way her elves bristled at him, but he enjoyed watching her wrestle with the truth. For the first time, the girl's voice wavered. "What are you talking about?" Ethan's smirk deepened. "You're an elf hunter. It explains why you were so quick to claim that sphere, and why your elves didn't hesitate to appear the moment you shouted." The girl's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Around them, the forest held its breath, waiting to see which of them would make the next move. Her cheeks flamed at Ethan's words. She bit her lip at a loss for a retort, until finally she spat out, "Ha! You stole my prey, and now you lecture me? Poison Rose, paralysis powder, dream demon, illusory flash." Ethan let out a cold laugh. This was the Wild. He had no intention of showing mercy just because his opponent was a girl. After all, in his past lives, he'd already defeated more than one powerful female trainer. "Darkcrow, scatter that paralysis powder. Mindbreaker, dispel her phantom light. Paula, strike now with lightning flash." As soon as a battle began, there was no turning back. Darkcrow darted forward, its wings whipping the poisonous spores into the air and neutralizing the powder's effects. Mindbreaker roared, breaking the strange ghostly glow that Dream Demon had conjured. And before the girl could react, Paula charged in from the flank, lightning crackling from her crest. The girl kept her Pokémon at just enough distance to remain cautious. Paula couldn't scan her opponent's stats. But from what Ethan had seen so far, her Pokémon was strong, certainly, yet no match for his. Paula's sudden assault had already thrown the girl on the defensive, and Ethan knew the victory was all but assured. No opposing elf can hold Paula back. Today's her second match, and she's only getting stronger. Be sure to ask about a monthly pass at the ticket counter, and secure your seats now. Don't miss out. Reserve your tickets and mark this one as a favorite. Chapter 152, Armor Bird. Ethan's giant wasp thundered across the clearing, pincers bared for a deadly strike. The girl met its charge with a steely glare, instantly reading the creature's lethal intent. With a fluid motion, she withdrew a Pokeball from her belt and sent it spinning into the air. Dora, go! In a flash of light, a new creature materialized on the battlefield, an armor bird, its metallic feathers gleaming. At the sight of this rare, powerful Pokémon, Ethan's wasp stalled mid-lunge, uncertainty rippling through its posture. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. He could sense genuine danger emanating from the newcomer. He frowned. He couldn't blame his wasp for hesitating. It had only recently been caught, and their bond was still fragile. But it wouldn't have balked like this if the girl's armor bird weren't formidable. Return bolt, Ethan ordered, voice calm but serious. His wasp obediently vanished in a swirl of golden smoke. Ethan studied the girl across the field. She'd ventured here alone with a top-tier Pokémon at her side, proving she was no mere novice. With that realization came a spark of respect, and the knowledge that this encounter would demand every ounce of his concentration. Ethan's sharp command to the elf didn't go unnoticed. The girl's eyes widened, and she stepped forward, cheeks flushed. "Hey, are you a hunter?" Her voice tinkled like a silver bell in the quiet clearing. Ethan hesitated, then gave a slow nod. There was no point denying it. Her question was too perceptive, and his presence here made the truth obvious. She glanced past him, studying the trio of creatures at his side. A pale pink boar whose bristles shimmered in the dawn light, a sleek raven with onyx feathers that seemed to absorb every stray ray, and a wispy, silent wraith that hovered just behind them. Not one looked underpowered. With a measured slap of her palm against her wooden spear shaft, a gesture twice as forceful as normally needed, she tested the weapon's balance. If she could fell a rock serpent with that, what could they do? She forced herself to breathe slowly, remembering that true strength only revealed itself in combat. From the steady confidence in Ethan's stance and the unwavering calm in his eyes, she knew she shouldn't underestimate him. This wasn't her first hunting ground, but this hunter was different from the rocket mercenaries she'd clashed with before. Elves like her prided themselves on survival skills and razor-sharp instincts in the wild, and Ethan's company matched them. For a long moment, neither spoke. The tension coiled between them like a drawn bowstring. She'd come looking for an adversary, and perhaps found one worthy. Ethan weighed his next move, equally cautious. In hunting, there were no half measures, no unfinished business. Every choice carried a finality that both of them understood all too well. Ethan paused for a heartbeat, weighing his options. The fight ahead wouldn't be much different from the last, but after all he'd been through, he was determined to stay and face it. Even if it cost him something, he wasn't as weak as before, and who knew how much stronger he'd grow. A small clash now might ignite the spark for something far greater down the road. Facing the girl at full strength, Ethan figured he still had an 80% chance of victory. He squared his shoulders and sent the command. "Dark Crow, gather, Wind's blessing, accelerate." With that, he marshaled his elven warriors into perfect battle readiness. The girl's eyes flashed with alarm and anger. She realized he truly intended to fight to the end. She had no idea where he'd come from, but she wasn't about to let him walk away. "Hey, you rude jerk," she yelled. "It's just a giant rock snake. Do you really need to kill it? Do you honestly think you can take me on?" Her tone trembled with a mix of fear and indignation, as if Ethan had already trampled her rights. Ethan didn't bother to reply. He simply watched as his elves shifted into formation, every arrow and blade poised. Ghost, his steadfast companion, remained at his side, eyes alert for any lurking danger. And then, with the wind at their backs, they surged forward into the fray. Ever since the girl had spoken her demand, Ethan couldn't read a single emotion on her face. She looked as frozen as a wooden statue. But was she really that unfeeling? And why was she making such a fuss over a worthless little rock snake? No normal person would stubbornly press the issue like this. With nowhere else to vent his rising frustration, Ethan slammed his boot against the hard earth, as though punishing the impassive girl herself. After a moment of stewing in silence, he let out a low, defeated growl. What chance do I have against a lunatic like her? Talk about bad luck. Without a word of warning, the girl slipped another small orb, an elf ball, from her belt and sent it spinning skyward. Ethan's jaw tightened. More elves? He was on the verge of lunging forward to strike, but before he could move, the sphere cracked open in midair. A creature burst forth, its form framed in shining silver-white armor. Beneath its wings, deep red feathers ruffled like a dark flame, and a row of serrated teeth glinted from its curved beak. Ethan's heart sank the instant he recognized it. It's the armored bird, a steel-flying spirit, he thought. Known throughout the realms for its ironclad resilience, this was no opponent to be taken lightly. Ethan studied the type chart one last time and felt his heart sink. Except for fire and electric moves, which hit for double damage, every other type was at a severe disadvantage against this creature. Normal, flying, steel, fighting, dragon, and fairy attacks were halved. Bug and grass moves dealt only a quarter of their usual damage. And ground and poison techniques? They simply didn't work at all. 10 of the 18 elemental types were effectively useless here. Ethan didn't have a single fire or electric type Pokémon. In any battle with this steel-clad powerhouse, he'd be utterly outmatched. Before he could react, the girl in front of him slammed her fist against Skarmory's armored neck, glaring at him with narrowed eyes. With a swift, furious leap, she vaulted onto the bird's back. At once, her 3 remaining Pokémon flanked her, forming an iron-willed barrier between Ethan and herself. "Don't you dare come any closer, you lunatic!" she screamed. Without another word, she yanked on Skarmory's reins, and the metallic wings unfolded. The massive bird began to lift off the ground, but even as it soared, the girl couldn't resist one final insult. "Humph, you have no idea who you're dealing with. I'm a member of the Pirate Brigade, remember that." And with a powerful flap of its wings, Skarmory carried her out of sight, leaving Ethan alone under the rattling steel sky. Ethan's warning cut through the clearing like a blade. "Remember this name, and stay far away. Otherwise, I'll have to bite you." Furious, he vaulted into the saddle of the armored bird, a sleek, metal-winged creature, and launched into the sky without another glance. The horned beasts froze in place, exchanged panicked looks, then scattered into the underbrush. Moments later, they regrouped, staring up at Ethan's retreating silhouette with cold, uncertain eyes. They waited for him to give the order to pursue, but he simply watched the last glimmer of metal vanish against the sunset. Silence stretched between them. After a long pause, Ethan sighed and muttered under his breath, "I really ought to get one of those flying rigs myself. Would have made tonight a lot easier." Below him, the bull-like monsters stewed in frustration. They'd witnessed the young hunter from the Pirate Brigade slip away on that armored bird, but they'd been too far to intervene, and the sudden arrival of Ethan's mount had caught them completely off guard. What had once felt like an 80% chance of trapping him now seemed barely 50, maybe even less. Defeated by the distance and surprise, the creatures fell into uneasy quiet. There was nothing more to be done. At least, not tonight. Ethan pressed a hand against his pocket, feeling the extraordinary weight of the gold coins within. The massive rock serpent he'd acquired had fetched a king's ransom, and for once he could honestly call himself the profiteer. Yet even as the clink of coin echoed in his ears, he refused to let himself grow complacent. There was still the matter of finding a flying device, the key to unlocking the next stage of his journey. He could almost taste the rush of wind under his wings, if only he could locate the right craft. With newfound resolve, Ethan tucked away his earnings and set his sights on the horizon. Tomorrow, he would follow every lead, question every trader, and chase down any rumor that might bring him closer to the skies. Until then, he savored the moment of victory, knowing that this was only the beginning. If you enjoyed this chapter, please consider showing your support. Monthly passes, recommendations, favorites. No rewards to offer at the moment. My debts are still too high for giveaway chapters. Thank you all for reading and for your continued encouragement. Chapter 153, Return to Cage City. As the huntress's silhouette disappeared into the drifting mist, Ethan allowed himself one last look at the jagged iceberg behind him. With the colossal rock serpent now tamed under his command, his mission here was effectively complete. All that remained was to ride back to Cage City's rocket base and collect the supplies waiting for him. He loosened the serpent's bindings, and the creature, its hide a mosaic of stone, bowed in silent deference. Ethan intended to turn the beast over to the Hunters Guild in exchange for his reward, but for the moment it made an ideal mount. Its thick, rock-like scales and powerful coils were perfectly suited to the treacherous mountain trails. With a sharp whistle, he summoned his elven companions. One by one, they clambered onto the serpent's broad back, gripping its jagged plates as it surged forward. The giant snake bounded down the slope with astonishing ease, as though the crags and ravines beneath its belly were nothing more than a smooth boulevard. When they finally reached the valley floor, Ethan brought the serpent to a halt. Though riding was far quicker than hiking, he knew the guild expected the creature delivered at the rocket base in person. The elves dismounted with audible grumbles, but Ethan paid their complaints no mind. Their training was behind schedule, and he intended to remedy that at once. He couldn't shake the image of the huntress's determined gaze. It was a stark reminder that countless young trainers were out there, each driven by ambition and thirst for renown. Complacency had no place on his journey. With renewed resolve, Ethan shouldered his pack, rallied his elves, and set out along the winding road that led straight to Cage City's gates, and to whatever challenges awaited him at the rocket base. Ethan sat astride the great rock serpent as it tore through the undergrowth, heedless of saplings and only steering around the sturdiest trunks. All the way, he could sense powerful elven warriors in pursuit, countless blades flashing between the trees, each interpreting the serpent's thunderous passage as a direct challenge. Normally, the rock serpent was mild-mannered, but under the weight of Ethan and the relentless pressure of the elves, it bristled with unease. More than once it rumbled a protest, as if pleading with the woodland warriors to halt their advance. Ethan could almost hear its thoughts. "Don't attack me! Stop stepping on my head!" But Ethan knew his companion had nothing to fear. Even if a few elves outmatched him in individual strength, he had every means to keep them at bay. Once they cleared elven territory, the bulk of their pursuers would give up the chase. And for the few who pressed on, Ethan's arsenal, crackling ice spells to slow them, shadowy crows swooping to harry their ranks, ferocious summoned beasts, and a ceaseless hail of slingstones would be more than enough to turn them back. So the serpent's hesitant strikes never truly aimed at Ethan, and together they thundered, unimpeded through the forest toward safety. Ethan urged his massive rock serpent through the forest just before sunset, careening along at more than twice the speed he'd managed on the way in. If the streets had been less crowded, he would have ridden all the way into Kaji City, but the thought of drawing unwanted attention made him hesitate. After a moment's consideration, he decided to dismount and leave the rock serpent hidden at the forest's edge, opting instead to blend in on foot. He swapped out his riding leathers for plain traveler's clothes, pulled a low-peaked cap down over his brow, and kept his gaze fixed on the ground as he slipped past patrols and into the city gates. Almost immediately, he noticed a heaviness hanging in the air, an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there before. Rumors of increasing skirmishes between the Pokémon League and the Rocket faction must be true, he thought. All the more reason to get in, secure Paula's recovery, and get out again. The Elf Center, once a bustling hub of trainers, Pokémon, and merchants, now felt eerily deserted. Doors stood propped open, but only a handful of healers moved through the chambers. Ethan stepped up to the reception counter without waiting for a line. There wasn't one. He placed the super ball containing Paula on the desk, his heart tightening at the sight of the small, familiar silhouette frosted against its glowing orb. A young attendant looked up. "You need treatment?" "Yes," Ethan answered, sliding a handful of coins across the counter. "Please, could you check her over right away? She's just been captured in the wild, and I want to make sure she's all right." The attendant nodded briskly, scanning the ball with a handheld device. "Leave it to me. We'll have her out of the ball after a quick examination." Ethan tucked his hands into his pockets and leaned against the wall, eyes drifting to the deserted wards beyond. The city felt like a powder keg waiting to go off. He just hoped Paula would be healthy enough to face whatever came next. She looked healthy enough now, but Ethan still wasn't entirely convinced she'd escaped hidden injuries. After all, she'd received no proper treatment in the wild. Once hurt, she'd been forced to hide in a cave and silently lick her wounds. 10 minutes later, Ethan activated his elf ball again. The scan revealed that apart from mild malnutrition, her vitals were strong and her development completely normal. The medical team suggested that if he had extra resources, he should feed her more nutritious fare, energy cubes, for example. Ethan thanked them, agreed, and arranged for a private room at the Elven Center. With Kaji City in its current state of unrest, he didn't feel safe staying in a regular hotel. That night, he slipped into Kaji City's black market. Since the city hosts Chengdu's largest rocket base, most underground dealers here have ties to Team Rocket. In his previous life, this was the black market he knew best. He turned in his captured elves to the Hunters Guild without difficulty, earning 1 hunter point and a cash reward. He decided to leave the enormous rock serpent in the guild's custody for the time being. Ethan wasn't in any rush to finish the assignment. He still had a full month before the deadline. And besides, that granite serpent he'd captured still had its uses. In the meantime, his little boar had just earned 150,000 experience points, and his pale green formation certification had climbed to the 500,000 mark. On top of that, he'd recently crafted energy blocks for Xiao Qian and pocketed another 200,000 alliance coins. With the 2.4 million he'd already saved, his total now stood at 3.25 million coins. He slipped into the black market once more and spent 250,000 of those coins on specialized materials for high-power energy blocks and a handful of sundry supplies. When he stepped back onto the street, he still had 3 million coins in his pocket. To a civilian, that would be an astonishing fortune. To Ethan, who was responsible for training half a dozen elves, it barely counted as spending. And that was just for common materials. If he started buying rare artifacts or skill certification discs, his balance would vanish in no time. Better to keep a healthy reserve, he told himself, just in case. Ethan carefully set aside the elven skill discs. Unless it became absolutely necessary, he still hoped to claim them through the Rocket Redemption list. Those particular abilities intrigued him far more than any black market purchase. Stepping out of the underground bazaar, he let out a slow breath. The tension inside had been suffocating. The usual din of street vendors was muted, and few dared to call out their wares. Everywhere he looked, people were desperate to offload whatever they could. Rare potions, strange ores, quick boost materials, anything to gain an edge. No one was under any illusion. The city itself felt charged with unease. More league trainers had been appearing on these streets lately, and the influx of unfamiliar faces only fueled whispered conjecture. Passers-by spoke in clipped tones, 1-0, or 2 words at most, before hurrying on, eyes downcast. Ethan didn't linger. He navigated the winding alleys back to the Elven Center, an enclave of calm in the restless city. Here, he still carried the official status of a league trainer, and at least for now, he was safe. All that remained was to settle his affairs. Tomorrow he would gather his belongings and set off once more. "I'd be happy to help, but I'll need the full text of the chapter you'd like rewritten. Could you please paste the entire chapter or the portions you want revised here? That way I can produce a coherent, polished version in idiomatic English, renaming Aoki to Ethan and ensuring he's consistently portrayed as male." Chapter 154, Rage Lake Base. Before dawn, Ethan slipped away from the Elven Center in a simple traveler's disguise and set out north of Kaji City. His destination was the notorious Lake of Rage, Once a quiet haven for villagers, it now lay abandoned after the Rocket Corps' relentless experiments poisoned the land. The remaining inhabitants had long since fled, and the facility's red-eyed sentries now kept watch over its shores. Ethan wore plain clothes and traveled alone, leaving his elven companions behind to avoid drawing suspicion. In better days, the Alliance had built a well-paved road here for tourists and locals alike. Now that road served chiefly the rocket forces, and occasionally a curious adventurer brave enough to snoop around. Late morning found him strolling along the empty stretch. He passed only 2 or 3 travelers, rocket officers incognito, their rigid posture and hidden insignia betraying their true allegiance to anyone who knew what to look for. Ethan noted every detail, an embroidered rank stripe on a cloak's edge, a faint uniform seam at someone's collar, but never paused to confront them. He simply kept walking. 2 hours later, the road ended at a reinforced steel fence erected across the path. At the lone intersection, a half-dozen rocket guards stood watch, rifles slung over their shoulders, their eyes scanning every traveler who approached. Beyond the fence lay the restricted perimeter of the Lake of Rage facility, Ethan's destination, and the next step in his daring plan. Ethan smoothed down his jacket and stepped forward under the guards' watchful eyes. As he approached the checkpoint, one of them blocked his path with a neutral expression. "This is a restricted area," the guard said. "You can't enter without authorization." Ethan remained silent. He straightened his coat just enough to reveal the rocket's insignia on his belt, then pulled out his company ID. The guard's face didn't change at first, but when he recognized the badge, his stance relaxed. "Hold on here," he said, taking the ID. With that, he slipped inside the fenced guardhouse to verify Ethan's credentials, while 2 other sentries kept a close eye on him. Ethan allowed himself a small nod of approval. He'd visited many rockets facilities before. Most were rundown and poorly managed, but this one in Cargill felt different. The guards were alert and disciplined, evidence that this base wasn't simply a showpiece. In a high-stakes world where even the Alliance could strike without warning, reliable personnel were vital. Ethan waited patiently. It wouldn't be long now. Ethan stepped up to the checkpoint, handed over his ID, and watched the guard scan it before handing it back with a brief nod. The barrier lifted with a mechanical whir, but this was only the public entrance to the Lake of Rage, not the hidden rocket research base. Ever since the recent upheavals in Kaiji City, security around these waters had grown unexpectedly strict. Beyond the fence lay the real surprise. Every passerby wore some sign of Team Rocket. Some were dressed head to toe in the familiar black and red uniform. Others simply sported a discreet R insignia on their jacket, chest, or cap. To blend in, Ethan slipped a rocket badge off the officer's belt as he passed, clipped it to his pant pocket, and let the gleaming R buckle shine at his waist. Almost instantly, the curious stares around him softened into casual indifference. He smoothed down his jacket and reached for the Pokeball at his hip. With a quiet click, he released his Murkrow into the twilight air. As the crow-shaped Pokémon landed lightly on his shoulder, the last lingering glances evaporated. Ethan was, for the moment, just another rocket agent on official business. Ethan lifted his chin and bared his teeth at the gathering of rocket agents and their elf companions, a silent warning that hesitation would not be tolerated. He piloted the Dark Crow straight to the Lake of Anger research base, and as he descended, more and more uniformed rockets swarmed the tarmac, elves flitting at their sides. Nobody paid him any special mind. He'd long since learned how to blend in here. An hour later, Ethan found himself at a stony fork in the ground that led into an underground passage. 10 rockets agents, all in crisp black and red uniforms, formed a tight semicircle around the entrance. They scanned the area like hawks before settling their eyes on him. This checkpoint was stricter than any he'd encountered so far. His presence drew a few curious glances, but no one reached for their comlinks. After all, these were confirmed rockets officers, and his credentials must have cleared him when he arrived. Still, because this junction was off-limits to anyone without explicit authorization, 2 particularly burly guards stepped forward to block his path. "Kid, you're not clearance for this area," growled the larger of the 2, flashing a grin that looked more like a threat than a smile. His eyes were cold enough to stop a child's tears in their tracks. Ethan met his gaze steadily. The tunnel yawned behind the guards, darkness beckoning. He flexed his fingers inside his coat. Tonight, he wouldn't be turned away. Ethan squared his shoulders as the two men blocked his path. The taller of the pair towered over him, well over 2 meters, every muscle rippling beneath his shirt. His companion was no less formidable. Yet standing before them, Ethan looked no more threatening than a boy, especially with the dark crow perched on his shoulder. Still, neither mercenary showed any hint of underestimating him. "I want to see your captain," the larger man growled, his tone more demand than question. Ethan met his glare evenly. The crow let out a low caw, as if echoing its master's resolve. "Then let's not waste time," Ethan replied. The thug sneered and waved an arm. "Come with us, and don't even think about wandering off." Without waiting for a response, he herded Ethan down a narrow corridor to a reinforced steel door set into the cavern wall. A few knocks later, it slid open to reveal their captain, a young man of unassuming height and average build. He stood in the dim light of the underground tunnel, arms folded, his expression cool and unreadable. The taller mercenary stepped forward and spat. "Captain, this boy says he demands an audience." Ethan straightened, the crow shifting its grip, but otherwise silent. The captain's dark eyes locked onto his, measuring him without a word. And in that tense silence, Ethan knew this meeting would soon reveal whether his gamble had paid off, or whether it would be his last. Chapter title: Repaying the Debt. Ethan stepped out of the shadows and approached the guarded entrance, where a young man lounged against the stone wall, idly sharpening a dagger. The youth glanced up, blinked once, then asked lazily, "What's your business here?" Ethan kept his expression neutral. "The captain requested my return to post." He sounded polite, but firm. At that, the youth raised an eyebrow. Ethan unfastened the small black medallion at his belt, the emblem of the Rocket Division's Shadow Crew, and passed it into the youth's hand. The moment the young guard recognized the insignia, his eyes widened. He stared at Ethan for a full 3 heartbeats before breathing out, "I've been waiting for you to show your face." Ethan froze. "Waiting for me?" he wondered. "Why?" The youth sheathed his dagger with a decisive click. "Follow me. I'll escort you in." With a sharp gesture, he dismissed 2 burly guards posted beside him. They grunted, stepped aside, and exchanged nods of understanding. The youth pressed a concealed panel in the wall. A heavy hatch swung open to reveal a narrow stairway leading downward into darkness. "After you," he said, stepping back. Ethan took a last look at the dock's dim lamplight, then followed the youth into the underground passage. Each step echoed his determination. He was here to settle his debt, and nothing would stand in his way. "It looks like the chapter text is missing. Could you please paste the full passage you'd like me to rewrite into coherent idiomatic English?" "Once I have the complete text, I'll rename Aoki to Ethan as a male and polish the narrative for you." Chapter 155. Battle Assessment. Ethan had been to the rocket research base more times than he could count, so familiar with its corridors that he could navigate its twists and turns blindfolded. Yet today, the facility looked nothing like the shattered ruin he remembered. Back then, walls lay in splinters, debris choked every hallway, and the whole complex bore the scars of the Alliance's surprise attack. His first assignment here had been to clear the wreckage so the rocket team could rebuild. No one knew this place better than he did. Now, the buildings stood pristine, systems humming, and security checkpoints alive with activity. Ethan fell into step behind the young lieutenant escorting him, each of them slipping past sensor gates and scanning terminals. Deep beneath the surface lay 5 basement levels, each locked behind progressively stricter clearances. Ethan watched the control panel beside them light up. B3. Captain's rank or higher required. He drew a steady breath. Beyond this door, the heart of the base, and their next challenge, awaited. Ethan and the young attendant reached the 4th checkpoint of the facility. The attendant tapped a series of numbers into the keypad beside the reinforced door. Moments later, a face materialized on the small monitor overhead, a middle-aged man with a thick, double-layered beard. "My lord, he's arrived," the attendant reported with a respectful nod. Let him in," the bearded man replied, narrowing his eyes. He turned back to the attendant. "Open the door for him." With a soft click, the door slid open. Ethan stepped inside. Under normal security protocols, this gate would require the captain's clearance, and anyone arriving afterward would need a second-level authorization. The ease with which it opened told him all he needed to know. The attendant must be a rocket captain, and the man on the screen was at least as high in rank. No doubt the bearded officer had been appointed by headquarters to receive visitors here. Rocket captains are renowned as the elite among trainers. Their strength rivals the very best, and a few exceptional individuals even verge on the junior ultra tier. Tonight, it seemed, Ethan was about to meet one of them. Ethan glanced up at the towering structure of the Lake Anger research base. 5 floors stacked like an inverted pyramid, each level smaller, more restricted, and more secretive than the one below. He stood on the 4th floor now, a place where only those with the highest clearances ever set foot. By rank and paperwork, he didn't belong here. By raw ability, he was leagues beyond most occupants. Yet rules were rules, and every movement within these walls was logged on film. A young operative guided him down a sterile corridor and stopped before a heavy door. Beyond it lay an office dominated by a broad mahogany desk. Behind that desk sat a middle-aged man in a spotless white coat, his neat mustache betraying neither warmth nor judgment, only keen interest. This was the senior officer who'd approved Ethan's unauthorized passage. The man's steel-gray eyes brightened when Ethan entered. "Is this our subject?" he asked. The operative bowed. "Yes, sir, I've verified his credentials and his medal." Ethan stepped forward, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. He knew all eyes were drawn to the small, dark raven perched companionably on his shoulder, a living emblem of his past exploits. The officer studied him from head to toe, paying particular attention to the bird. Finally, the man nodded and motioned to a chair. "Take a seat, Ethan. We have much to discuss." Ethan sat, bracing himself for whatever questions or commands lay ahead. Ethan shivered as if a wolf's glare, a tiger's snarl, and a leopard's stare had all frozen him in place. Goosebumps rippled across his arms, but he forced a calm smile. The middle-aged man at the head of the table leaned forward and pressed a small yellow button. With a soft click, the wall behind them split open to reveal a hidden training chamber. The man stroked his graying beard, amusement dancing, Jia in his eyes. "Mo Yan," he called to the young officer standing at attention, "test his strength." Mo Yan dipped into a respectful bow. "Yes, sir." Ethan's brow shot up. Test his strength? Was this part of some covert operation? He stepped into the cavernous room, taking in the dozens of specialized machines lining the walls. At its center stood a reinforced sparring arena, built to take hits far harder than a man could deliver. From his plush executive chair, the middle-aged man crossed his legs and tapped his beard again, a mocking smile on his lips. "Show me what you've got. Pass this assessment, and you'll earn everything you came here for." Ethan's pulse quickened. A test on his very first day? He squared his shoulders and met Mo Yan's gaze. Whatever this trial was, he wouldn't back down. Ethan stared across the arena and felt a familiar knot of dread tighten in his chest. His opponent's aura was unmistakably squadron level, far above anything he'd ever faced. How was he supposed to win? A middle-aged man sitting courtside leaned forward and called out, "The gap in strength here is ridiculous. Mo Yan, summon an elf. And you," he said, turning his gaze on Ethan, "you're free of the usual restrictions. No limits on elf numbers, no binding battle rules. Go all out." Ethan's eyes narrowed. On the surface, the offer looked generous. Mo Yan could only bring a single elf to the fight, but even one squadron-level creature could crush an unprepared challenger before the match even truly began. More importantly, the man had lifted all standard limitations, and Ethan sensed there was a catch. Still, he refused to believe the sponsor would actually order his death over a mere exhibition, especially since Ethan, as one of the Rocket Shadow Group's deputy squad leaders, wasn't exactly an unknown quantity. A blatant killing would ruin the organizer's reputation just as surely as it would stain the broadcast. Mo Yan, expression calm, unclipped a small orb from his belt. The rocket logo gleamed on its surface as he nodded once, then sent it sailing into the center of the arena. Silence fell as the orb hit the ground. Moments later, a subtle shimmer blossomed around it, and a single, towering figure materialized in a flash of light. The squadron-level elf had arrived. Ethan drew a steadying breath. No one had told him this would be easy, but he wasn't about to fold, especially not when so much was on the line. He stepped forward, squared his shoulders, and prepared to face down the giant before him. The first round had begun. A massive, wide-mouthed bat suddenly materialized in the clearing. In the same instant, a pale light shimmered across Ethan's vision, and a data window snapped into focus. Name: Big-mouthed bat. Light green. Gender: male. Level: 32. Type: poison flying. Characteristic: psychic. Held item: none. Genetic skills: gust, surprise strike. Basic skills: leech, supersonic, frighten, wing attack, strange light, airblade, quick attack, poison fang, mean look. Taught moves: snatch, clear smog. Skill learner moves: power surge, water, shadow ball, dream eater, substitute. As a squadron leader in Team Rocket, Ethan's partners typically hovered around level 30 or above. To him, this level 32 bat was actually one of the weaker members under his command. He'd never unleash his full strength unless absolutely necessary, partly because it wasn't needed, but also because he didn't want to draw too much attention on mission logs or video records. Ethan knew that. Although he couldn't yet match the top-ranking rocket officers head-to-head, he held a different kind of power. The moment he showed any hint of discontent or dissatisfaction, dozens of subordinates would volunteer for the riskiest assignments just to earn his notice. And that was a position he intended to keep. It looks like the chapter text itself didn't come through. Could you please paste the full machine-translated chapter? Once I have the complete text, I'll rewrite it into a smooth, idiomatic English version with Aoki renamed to Ethan, as requested. Chapter 156, Mo Yan. The giant-billed bats ahead weren't ordinary creatures, they were venomous flying spirits. Fortunately, Ethan's superpower system could suppress poison-based entities, and his frost-ice system was perfectly suited to counter aerial threats. However, mindless beasts weren't allowed to appear under daylight, so Paula was the only viable choice for this fight. The middle-aged advisor had reminded Ethan that he couldn't exceed his elf summon limits. His ghost spirit was only level 19, no match for a level 32 giant-billed bat, and his bulky tank-type summons were far too slow to deploy in a pinch. Ethan drew in a deep breath and threw an elf orb to the ground. With a flare of red light, Paula materialized beside him. Arms crossed, head cocked to one side, her gaze cold and unyielding. Mo Yan and the others watched in stunned silence. Even without knowing her full history, they could tell from her aura that this Paula was anything but ordinary. Dark Crow, Paula, this mission is yours, Ethan commanded. Ethan watched as Murkrow let out a squawk of relief he'd been holding back until now. Paula, by contrast, was still getting used to her new partner. They'd only just bonded, and their teamwork hadn't fully gelled. This match would hinge on her ability to synchronize with Murkrow. Golbat, strange light, Mo Yan called, his tone calm but decisive. Instantly, a sphere of eerie violet energy formed in Golbat's cavernous mouth. Murkrow, Tailwind, let's pick up the pace. As the wind whipped around the battlefield, Murkrow and Mew felt their speed surge. Tailwind was a team move. It boosted both of their velocities at once. No sooner had that taken effect than Mew blurred forward again, using agility to push its speed even higher. Golbat's strange light attack streaked toward them, but at their newly accelerated pace, Murkrow and Mew easily outmaneuvered it. Mew's feathers still shimmered where the energy had grazed him, but he darted clear before the blast could land. Mew was naturally fast, but now, fueled by Tailwind and another burst from agility, he was downright untouchable. Murkrow, too, was flying at full tilt. Earlier, Ethan had had Murkrow shed extra weight so he could stretch his wings to their limit. The bird was nearing his absolute maximum. Ethan's heart pounded. Paula's performance with her newly caught Murkrow had been shaky at first. Would this be the moment they finally clicked as a true team? The battle raged on, speed and strategy clashing in a whirl of feathers and energy. Every fraction of a second now counted. Ethan watched as Mo Yan's enormous big-mouth bat unleashed its spectral light with blistering speed. Because spectral light was a ghost-type move, it automatically struck both of Ethan's spirit allies, Dark Crow and Paula, leaving neither with a chance to dodge. Dark Crow in particular staggered under the blow. Mo Yan gave a satisfied nod. All right, let's step it up. He raised a hand and pointed it at the bat. A a swirl of inky black mist unfurled from his palm, coiling around the creature's head. Provocation! The bat's eyes flared crimson, its posture shifting as an irresistible urge to attack took hold. It beat its wings in place, energy crackling along its feathers. Dark Crow, wing strike, Mo Yan called. With a fierce cry, Dark Crow dove, wings bristling with flight energy, and collided with the bat. The force of the impact rattled Dark Crow's entire body, sending it skidding backward through the air. The bat, however, merely shook itself free, flapped its massive wings once, and lurched back a few paces, clearly unfazed. Ethan clenched his fists. The gap in raw power was still obvious, but he had more tricks up his sleeve. Ethan's ice-honed vision tracked Mo Yan's two summoned spirits the moment they struck. First, the Dark Crow was blown aside by his glacial surge. Before he could recover, Mo Yan's whip of crackling light lashed at his creature with blinding speed. "Para, frozen fist!" Ethan barked, his voice echoing over the field. He drew in frigid energy, condensing it around his fist until it gleamed blue-white. He released the blow directly into the charging big-mouth bat. Ice exploded against the bat's ghostly wings, crystallizing feathers and pinning them in place. The spectral beast faltered in midair, its next collision far less devastating than if it had struck unrestrained. Mo Yan simply smirked. "Big mouth bat, high-speed star," she ordered, and the bat's form shimmered with eerie light. In an instant, it darted forward, a blur of wing and fang. Most of the bat's signature attacks carried a ghost-type energy, curious, undirected magic that even now, against two evil spirit battlers, found strange loopholes in their defenses. Ethan's electric whip, still crackling from Mo Yan's earlier assault, went rigid under the onslaught. A single swipe from the bat's phantom claws stunned it, then another brutal strike knocked it sideways, leaving it too off balance to dodge the follow-up. Ethan's heart pounded. Mo Yan's two spirits fought with no discernible pattern, no fixed rhythm he could time his counters to. If Paula were here to support him, to synchronize attacks, he might have a clear path to victory. But alone, trading blow for blow against unpredictable foes, he couldn't be sure he'd last another round. He clenched his free hand, determination flashing in his eyes. The fight was just beginning, and victory would demand every ounce of skill and wits he had. Ethan let the frozen fist strike him mid-attack. His reflexes were lightning fast, and he managed to block it, but only just. If he and his spirit moved in perfect harmony, he wouldn't even have to shout a command. The moment he meant a technique to form, it would arrive at full strength, not half-cooked. The difference in power would be enormous. Then, as if struck by a sudden resolve, Ethan's voice rang out coldly. "Dark Crow, awaken power! Pull them in, then icicle crash! Target human!" He knew there was no rule against a spirit attacking a person. He'd aim at the trainer and force the big-mouth bat to choose, keep fighting or fall back to defend its master. Either choice would put his opponent on edge, especially once they realized Ethan now commanded two spirits at once. Beside the ring, the middle-aged trainer, with flecks of gray in his beard, paused, one finger hovering in midair. Then a slow, satisfied smile spread across his face. He had never before seen a summoner so daring. At Ethan's command, the Dark Crow gathered the electrical energy crackling through the arena. Frost blossomed along its black feathers, and a swirling white wind erupted around it. Across from Ethan, Mo Yan's eyes narrowed as he absorbed the challenge. Ethan barely suppressed a snort of amusement. A wry smile curled his lips. This was exactly how a member of Team Rocket operated. Win by any means necessary. Play by the usual rules, and you might as well be hugging the competition. With a fierce cry, Dark Crow and Paula sprang into action. Shadows coalesced into a furious dark pulse, even as jagged ice shards formed around Paula's claws. Together they launched a single, devastating barrage, soaring high over the stunned Golbat and striking Mo Yan squarely in the back. A thunderous boom rocked the arena, sending plumes of dust billowing skyward. When the haze cleared, Ethan frowned. Golbat had never even tried to recover. It remained rooted to the spot, dazed and defenseless. From the elevated judge's chair, a middle-aged man rose and strolled into the clearing, slow claps echoing through the stands. "I heard you'd been off the island for some time," he drawled, eyes glinting. "I half expected you to lose your edge, yet your timing is still flawless, truly befitting Lord Ying's favored trainer." At the mention of Lord Ying, Ethan's jaw tightened. He met the man's gaze without flinching. "If you're looking for proof, I haven't lost my edge," he said quietly. "You're about to get it." The smoke cleared, and Mo Yan strode forward, his signature wheezing materializing at his side. He'd obviously called it up to counter the attacks from Dark and Pa, Ula. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he studied the Pokémon. According to the data streaming in from his battle chip, this wheezing was a solid level 39 with a dark green rating, stronger than Golbat and even more powerful than Murkrow and Purloin combined. There was no way anyone could take it down alone. A middle-aged man standing nearby stepped forward, beaming. "Allow me to introduce you to your senior from the last batch of Trial Island trainers, and now captain of Team Rocket, Mo Yan." He clapped Mo Yan appreciatively on the shoulder. Mo Yan nodded curtly, Wheezing's ominous chuckle resonating in the clearing. The message was unmistakable. This battle had just gotten a lot more dangerous. Chapter 157. Alliance Raid. Ethan sat quietly as the middle-aged instructor outlined the details of the Trial Island program. The final batch of testers, he called them. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Now that he'd just been promoted to squadron captain, would he return from the island already holding that rank? Each mission on Trial Island lasts 3 months, the instructor explained. But the interval between assignments can stretch up to 6 months. Talent and luck determine who goes next. He paused, scanning the faces before him. Not everyone experiences a rebirth like some of you. Those who do often rise through the ranks faster. Take Mo Yan, for example. He reached squadron captain in only half a year. Clearly, he's no ordinary recruit. Mo Yan said nothing. He leaned back in his chair, eyes unreadable, but Ethan could feel the man's ambition like a buzzing wire. These weren't students looking out for one another. They were trial graduates, each focused solely on personal gain. Help would only come if there was something in it for them. As the briefing wrapped up, Ethan glanced around the room, at eager faces, at hardened veterans, and took a steadying breath. Underneath the Alliance's confident exterior, every man here was fighting his own battle, and on Trial Island, only the strongest survived. Determined, Ethan rose to his feet. The real test was about to begin. Ethan stood at ease as the middle-aged man cut straight to the point. Without fanfare, he mentioned Mo Yan's involvement. Mo Yan was managing the operation under his direction, and produced a small, palm-sized black box from the folds of his coat. He handed it to Ethan with steady hands. "This is for Master Ying," the man said quietly. "I've prepared it myself. Now it's in your care. Deliver it safely." Under that polite yet unyielding gaze, Ethan sensed the weight of the order. The man looked every bit the kindly civilian he appeared to be, but Ethan knew better. A captain of the Rockets didn't earn his rank without risking countless lives. Swallowing any urge to question him, Ethan accepted the box and slipped it into the sealing ring at his belt. His task was clear. Null secrets, no detours, and certainly no questions about its contents. He would hand it over only to the Shadow Hand. In the Elven realms, magical delivery services had long since perfected instant transmission of ordinary parcels. But some items, like this one, or the coveted high-grade evolution stones, contained too much raw energy to be quantized into a portal spell. They simply couldn't be sent that way. That was why the old profession of courier still survived. Trusted couriers like Ethan were the only safe conduit for certain high-energy cargoes. And so, with the black box secured, he prepared to set out on the next leg of his journey. Ethan glanced up as the middle-aged officer finished handing him the last of the supplies. "If there's nothing else, don't linger here," the officer said. "Cage City isn't secure right now." "Yes, sir," Ethan replied, tucking the satchel under his arm. He knew they weren't safe. The slightest spark could set the city ablaze with conflict. No sooner had he spoken than a thunderous boom rocked the compound. Alarms blared, and hairline fractures spiderwebbed across the concrete walls. "Damn it," the officer cursed, his face paling. "They've chosen this moment to strike?" Beside him, Commander Mo Yan's expression darkened. A direct assault by the Alliance on this base, home to the Rocket's forward outpost, would be unprecedented. Even as their captain, Mo Yan might not weather an attack of that scale. Without another word, both men hurried for the exit, boots thundering down the corridor. They barely registered Ethan's presence. If the Alliance was mounting an all-out offensive, Who had time to worry about a low-ranking courier? Ethan's heart pounded as he watched them go. Could he slip away in the chaos? Or would he be caught in the crossfire of a war he had no choice but to deliver supplies to? He squared his shoulders. Gray, ipping his pack. There was no turning back now. If Kaj City exploded into battle, he would have to find his own way out, and fast. Ethan watched the office door warily. The two officers who'd just left shouldn't have returned so quickly. He pressed his teeth together. Beast, lock in these coordinates. A hulking, spectral creature materialized beside him, the summoned beast. The League's recent attack had ravaged the rocket's base, but it offered Ethan no real advantage. What he wanted was access to this research facility's central mainframe on the 5th floor, a treasure trove of data far beyond anything he'd ever seen in his past lives. Unfortunately, as a former team captain, he lacked clearance to enter that level. Only senior staff or lead scientists could go there. If the beast could mark his exact location, he might be able to slip back to the Elven Orb later and attempt a data heist. The risk was enormous, but the potential payoff was worth it. He felt the creature's low growl. The coordinate was set. Before Ethan could make his move, the two officers who'd re-entered the hallway fell silent as they caught sight of him. The taller, middle-aged man's expression turned cold and impatient. "Mo Yan," he snapped, "take him away." Mo Yan stepped forward, seizing Ethan's arm. Cornered but determined, Ethan met the man's glare, his mind racing through escape plans and the single hope of the beast's teleportation. The moment of truth had arrived. Transfer the data now. Mo Yan's voice was cold as he grabbed Ethan by the shoulders and hauled him to his feet. No one had time to fuss over a kid like Ethan. The middle-aged officer had insisted on sending him away. Left behind, Ethan might miss critical orders for the next engagement, and in a battle against the Alliance, that could mean serious injury or worse. Ethan clenched his jaw as Mo Yan dragged him down the corridor to the 3rd floor. He bit back any protest, enduring the ache in his shoulders without a sound. Finally, Mo Yan halted in front of a sleek metal door. "There's an elevator here that goes straight to street level," he said. "Head upstairs, but don't go south. The Alliance is striking from there. The defenders should hold them off for a while." With that, Mo Yan shoved Ethan into the elevator, slammed the door, and strode away. Ethan stood still, heart pounding, until he felt the car lurch upward. The acceleration was sharp but brief. 30 seconds later, the doors slid open, and he stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. Warm rays washed over him as he glanced southward, where distant plumes of smoke curled into the sky and the low rumble of artillery echoed on the horizon. Ethan muttered under his breath, "The Alliance really means business this time." Ever since he'd risen to quasi-king strength in his past life, he'd quietly probed the real reason behind their assault. His intel was fragmentary, but every rumor pointed to one conclusion. The company's research outpost had crossed a line. Its experiments into elven evolution threatened the Alliance's core interests. He didn't know exactly how far the scientists had progressed, only that they were on the brink of a major breakthrough. Walking away was not an option. Stepping out of the elevator, Ethan felt the weight of the corridors ahead. Security drones droned overhead, and patrolling guards could appear at any moment. Still, the data vault in those labs held the answers he needed. Even salvaging a sliver of their research could shift the balance in his favor. After all, the chip's astonishing capabilities depended entirely on the richness of its database. With a steadying breath, he melted into the shadows, determined to seize whatever secrets he could. If I could get hold of even a fraction of this data, I might finally reverse engineer the Kira Elven Egg's incubation process, or recruit a more dependable superpowered ally to boost my skills in record time. There were other missions worth attempting, but with those lumbering beasts prowling everywhere, I couldn't afford to waste any more Ensius. This was Ethan's ace in the hole. "One more push. 3rd time's the charm," he muttered, bracing himself for what came next. Chapter 158, Athena versus Lyub. The battlefield stretched out under a slate-gray sky, two mighty forces arrayed on either side of the no-man's land. On the rocket's front line stood General Athena, her fiery hair pulled back into a tight braid that shone against the crisp white of her robe. She rested one hand lightly on the hilt of her sword, her gaze steely as she surveyed the enemy ranks. At her side loomed Haruga, the silent sentinel whose towering frame and impenetrable armor struck fear into friend and foe alike. Facing them was Liub, the venerable gray-bearded curator of Kaji City's Grand Museum and leader of the Alliance contingent. He leaned on a silver-tipped cane, eyes alight with mischievous confidence. At his feet trotted a curious companion, a small pig-like ice elf whose shimmering frost breath hung in the air. Though it looked harmless, this creature was the product of Liub's unrivaled mastery of the ice elves, freed from ancient constraints, and now a living weapon in his command. Athena's lips curled into a thin, hard line. "Liub," she called across the gap, voice carrying on the chilly wind, "what favors have the Alliance politicians promised you? What price did they pay for your betrayal of the base here?" A low murmur rippled through both armies. For Athena, the defensive line she commanded was more than just dirt and barricades, it was her honor. If Liub's forces broke through, she would bear the full weight of responsibility. Yet the old curator merely chuckled, tapping his cane with deliberate calm. The little ice elf shuffled forward, its crystalline eyes fixed on Athena, its tiny tusks glinting like daggers. Tension crackled between them, as electric as the coming storm. Neither side dared make the first move, each waiting to see whose courage or whose resolve would crack under the gathering pressure. Athena's heart pounded as she faced Lubo, the seasoned enforcer at the top of Sakagi. Even if this mishap wasn't strictly her fault, the house would hold her fully accountable for any negligence. Lubo leaned on his carved walking stick, his thin lips curling into a faint smile. "Now, don't get so worked up, child. You knew exactly what you were doing when you tried to steal from us, and the boss isn't interested in excuses. And if you think I played unfairly, go ahead and blame me." Athena's jaw tightened. She was proud of her Uranus-level strength, but she knew in her bones that an old-school Uranus powerhouse like Lubo was leagues beyond her skill. In a straight fight, she wouldn't stand a chance. Yet she couldn't let him escape with the stolen data intact. If she failed to recover it, she'd never live down the wrath of Sakagi's leadership. Without another word, she swept her hand over her hip belt. 8 silver-blue orbs materialized in midair, each humming with latent energy. With a flick of her wrist, she launched them all at once. In an instant, 8 lithe elven warriors flickered into existence, their blades drawn and eyes blazing with loyalty to their summoner. Lubo watched her maneuver calmly, the same half-smile playing on his lips. He tapped his walking stick against the ground, then produced 4 matching orbs from his own robes. In a cascade of soft light, 4 ancient elven guardians emerged, their armor etched with runes older than any living city. And so the field erupted with swirling steel and crackling magic. Athena's 8 elven combatants pressed forward in a glittering wave, only to collide headlong with Lubo's stoic guardians. Sparks flew as blades met, and the air throbbed with unleashed power. Despite her fierce resolve, the truth was already clear. The gap between them was vast, and Athena was in far deeper trouble than she had ever imagined. Halugia was first to step forward, releasing 9 Pokémon in a single fluid motion. Ethan countered more sparingly. He sent out only 5, including a plucky Tepig, but the opening exchanges were every bit as fierce, and it took no time for both stubborn resistances and hidden weaknesses to reveal themselves. As Halugia and Ethan clashed, the rest of the League trainers and the Team Rocket operatives surged into the fray. The differences quickly became apparent. League trainers who hadn't endured true, blood-forged hardship were simply outmatched in straight-up brawls. Not infrequently, one Rocket member would bear the combined assault of 2 League trainers, and if either trainer let down their guard for just an instant, they could be knocked out, or worse. Watching from the sidelines, Ethan's brow darkened. He could see how lopsided these skirmishes threatened to become. Calmly, he retrieved 3 more Pokeballs from his belt. When he released them, 3 towering, near-champion-level Pokémon materialized in the swirling snow. With their arrival, the balance of the battle shifted so decisively that cheers and gasps rippled through the frozen air. Athena, pressed up against the makeshift barricade, ground her teeth as Ethan's powerful trio swept through the Rocket ranks. She knew there was no stopping him now. Ethan was giving everything he had, and under these circumstances, There simply wasn't time to worry about anyone else. Chapter 7. The siege of Frostfall Base chaos reigned across the frozen landscape. For 30 tense minutes, Team Rocket's defenders and the Alliance forces had been locked in a deadlock, neither side gaining ground, until Lubo's elves unleashed a brutal, all-out assault. Under their relentless pressure, the rocket lines shattered, and a wave of League trainers poured into the base. 2 kilometers away, Ethan pressed himself against a shattered stone wall, watching in stunned silence. He dared not move. Even at that distance, he felt the bite of enormous snowflakes, each as large as his thumb, drifting past his face. Lubo's power was beyond anything Ethan had ever seen. With a single sweeping gesture, the ancient sorcerer had summoned a blizzard that blanketed more than 2 kilometers of terrain, shifting the very weather of the region. This was no mere wizard's illusion. It was weather control on a grand scale, the terror of a true king of heaven made manifest. Ethan's heart thundered as he witnessed the Alliance's breakthrough. He tapped the side of his mask, then slipped it off and replaced it with a spare, sleek, unblemished. In one fluid motion, he summoned his loyal companion, the so-called dumb beast, its massive form materializing beside him in a swirl of snow and shadow. Ethan's fingers closed around the weapon secured at his back, his pulse steady, but his muscles coiled like springs. Beyond him, General Athena's forces continued their desperate duel with Lubo. The stalemate held, but Athena was clearly on the defensive, her troops straining under wave after wave of ice magic. Ethan exhaled, steeling himself. His moment had come. Soon, the fate of Frostfall Base would rest on his next move. Even a small army of elves can't make up for poor quality. Every time Ethan sent a raid straight at Lubo, they were stopped by that little pig at his side, its sole purpose to summon blizzards and guard Lubo's safety. In terms of raw power, Athena's forces held a 9-4 advantage, yet they still found themselves on the back foot. Ethan bided his time until the Allied forces had finally stormed the entrance of the underground fortress. By then, dozens of soldiers had already broken in. The first wave was probably deep within the tunnels. He glanced at the map hovering before him, pinpointing the exact coordinates he'd scrawled moments ago. "Dumb beast," he murmured, placing a hand on the creature's saddle blanket. He channeled his supercharged aura into the animal, syncing their pulses in a brief, silent meditation. The great beast's eyes snapped open, glowing with sudden awareness. The distance to the target wasn't far, just a few hundred meters through winding caverns. With a low growl, Dumb Beast flexed its massive limbs. A shimmer of golden energy coalesced around its form, and the next instant it vanished from the chamber. Ethan watched the spot where it had stood, his jaw set in determination. The final phase of his plan was underway. Now it was a race against time. Reach Lubo before the Blizzard Guardian could react, and the fate of the Alliance would hang in the balance. A flicker of light cut through the chaos as the beast vanished and reappeared inside the Alliance's own perimeter. A super elf operative, one of our best scouts, scowled, hurried over to Lubo's side, and whispered, "Master Lu, someone just blinked in. They've teleported straight into our base." Lubo's eyes narrowed to slits, a cold spark igniting behind his gaze. "Keep tracking that signature," he ordered, voice low but icy. "If they attempt to rematerialize anywhere, channel the spatial wards to sever their link immediately. No one gets through." The elf bowed. "Understood." Within the elven world, few wielders handle teleportation as deftly as that. If an enemy had slipped past their first line of defense, they could only be stopped at point-blank range. And that was precisely what Lubo intended. "Everyone, advance," he bellowed, the single command rippling through the ranks. "Accelerate the assault and push into the heart of their formation." Until now, Lubo had maintained a rigid defensive posture around the goddess Athena, but as soon as he shifted tempo, the air itself seemed to tighten. Elven archers surged forward, war-forged warriors slammed their shields in unison, and mages flared with arcane energy. The Alliance's might pressed down on Athena like a gathering storm, and for the first time since the battle began, her defenders wavered under the weight of sheer, unrelenting force. Ethan pressed himself flat against the narrow corridor wall, every muscle coiled for action. He watched as Lady Serena remained poised behind her desk, eyes fixed on the hollow screen before her. For what felt like an eternity, she'd waiting for her operatives to complete the last data transfer. Then, in a single, practiced motion, Ethan slipped into the adjoining office. He'd timed it perfectly, just as the brood of a guard beast lunged in the hallway, its massive bulk creating the perfect distraction. The creature's momentary charge gave Ethan the opening he needed. He darted behind a toppled security console, heart hammering but mind razor-sharp. Lady Serena still hadn't noticed him. She continued giving orders over the comlink. Sector 4 reporting in. All files are secured. Prepare for extraction. A low voice crackled in her earpiece. Understood, ma'am, but be advised, we may have to settle outstanding debts tonight. Serena's lips curved into a faint, confident smile. Then let them try. She turned back to her screen, unaware that Ethan was now mere feet behind her, the future of the entire operation balanced on the edge of a knife. Chapter 159. Ascending to Level 5. Ethan didn't know exactly how the Alliance had stirred up such a massive operation, but he could tell from the faint hairline cracks spreading across the office's supposedly solid walls that something big was happening inside. When he stepped back into that deserted workspace, not a single soul remained. He slipped out alongside his silent beast companion, moving as quietly as a shadow. In his previous life, Ethan had slipped through the 4th and 5th floors of this facility more times than he could count. He knew every corridor, every junction, and that knowledge gave him the courage to wade into these murky depths. Now, the hallways lay empty. The rocket researchers had fled at the first alarm, and all the security personnel were already deployed against the Alliance outside. Locked doors that once stood between him and his prize posed no challenge. Ethan pressed his hand to the biometric scanner beside the heavy steel portal. Within seconds, his custom chip overrode every protocol, and the door glided open without so much as a chirp of protest. 5 minutes later, he arrived at the stairwell that led from the 4th floor up to the 5th, and the heart of this facility's secrets. Ethan's squad, fighting alongside the rocket's forces, had only just cleared the 2nd floor. Normally, by now Ethan, who'd been sprinting non-stop, would be approaching the 5th. Instead, he stood frozen outside its heavy blast door. He remembered the rocket's captain's warning. He needed Level 5 clearance to slip inside, copy the files, and wipe the database. If he forced entry now, he'd almost certainly run straight into that man, and with the captain's power, Ethan wouldn't survive the encounter. His hand trembled over the biometric scanner as every nerve in his body screamed to back down. Then, from 3 floors above, the clash of weapons rang out. Shouts, bullets ricocheting, a desperate struggle. Intelligence had reached the Alliance fighters. If they simply smashed through the 5th floor's last line of defense, they risked destroying the very research they were sent to secure. A small team had broken through anyway, mounting a firefight while sending scouts upward to assess the situation. Ethan's heart pounded. He weighed his options, wait for backup and risk losing the data entirely, or plunge in alone and pray he could outwit the rocket's strongest defender. With a deep, steadying breath, he pressed his palm against the scanner, determination flaring in his chest, and braced himself for whatever lay beyond that door. 2 Elite 4 trainers had already smashed through the heavy security gate between the 2nd and 3rd floors. Frankly, Team Rocket's design for those key locks was laughably poor. Despite the trainers' formidable strength, they couldn't bring it down in a single blow. Luckily, Ethan carried a universal override chip that let him exploit any lingering weaknesses in the wiring. He paused for a heartbeat, then made a decision. Rather than moving straight up to the 5th floor, he strode over to the nearby control panel and slammed down the alarm switch. Instantly, klaxons and sirens ripped through both the 4th and 5th floors. Without hesitating, Ethan darted into a cramped maintenance room beside the 4th floor entrance. He pressed himself flat against the far wall, then laid a gloved hand gently on the back of his drowsy Pokémon. Outside, the corridor thundered with approaching footsteps. Whispering one crisp command, he watched his partner dissolve into a violet flash, teleporting safely away just as the door handle began to jiggle. Ethan pressed his ear against the cold metal door and slowed his breathing to a whisper. It was the same stealth technique he'd mastered during earlier Team Rocket incursions, perfect for lying in wait. and after enough covert missions, he'd become more than adept at staying perfectly still in the face of danger. I only heard the mechanical door slide open outside, followed by heavy footsteps and a string of curses. Damn it, and pressed himself against the far wall, heart pounding. He drew a steadying breath and forced his pulse to slow, refusing to peek through the crack. 3 agonizing minutes crawled by before the boots returned, this time paced and cautious, stopping just beyond the 5th-floor corridor. No one here. Who cut the alarm? A guard muttered to himself. My throat tightened. Quietly, I wove a sliver of my modest power into a filament of energy, anchoring it to the hulking beast beside me. That slender mental tether would have its reaction time the moment I gave the signal. A sudden crash. Boom! Echoed from the floor above. 2 guards had smashed through the doors on the 2nd and 3rd levels and were now hammering at the 4th-floor entrance below us. Damn Union dog! One snarled as their boots clattered away down the hall. I let out a long, shuddering breath. Finally, their attention had shifted. Without that distraction, I'd never have a chance to slip away. Ethan didn't hesitate. He hauled the hulking creature straight up to the 5th floor and stepped into a circular chamber ringed with computer terminals. Dozens of keyboards sat at the center, and along the walls were empty brackets where hardware modules used to be. Every device had been stripped away. In 3 quick strides, Ethan was at the main console. He pressed his hand against its smooth surface and thought, Chip, initiate a full database extraction. Pull every bit of information you can. A calm synthetic voice rang in his mind. Processing. Task initiated. Due to the database's size, analysis may take considerable time. Current progress, 0.1%. Ethan's pulse spiked. He'd known this facility held vast stores of data, but he hadn't realized just how massive it was. The chip's parsing speed felt excruciatingly slow, 0.1% and barely budging. Anxiety twisted in his gut, but there was nothing he could do except watch that progress indicator inch forward. He shifted to stand beside the console, hands still resting on the main unit, and scanned the room for anything else of value. The space was immaculate, every cable vanished, every rack empty. Athena's operative had done a shockingly thorough job. Aside from these undamaged terminals, there was nothing left for him to salvage. Ethan crouched amid the scattered sheets of paper on the floor. None of them bore anything remotely useful, so he abandoned the fruitless search and hooked his data-scanning chips into the nearest stack. The chips whirred to life, parsing document after document. 10 minutes later, the progress bar crept up to just 5%, yet even that small fraction represented a colossal volume of information. Another 10 minutes passed before the distant clash of combat drifted through the door. Shouts and hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor as Team Rocket operatives scrambled away. From the sound of their voices, Ethan knew they'd been in over their heads, struggling against 2 Pokémon League trainers of equal rank. It was true that low-level rocket grunts often outclass ordinary league challengers by a level or 2, but those gaps narrow and then vanish once you reach the upper tiers. At the elite trainer level, league trainers are every bit as formidable as the highest-ranked rocket agents. These aren't greenhorns, after all, but seasoned veterans who've proven themselves in real battle. Some even carry shadows from the darkest corners of the underground. Ethan pressed himself against the rough stone wall and forced himself to stay calm. Step by step, the fighting had inched its way to the threshold of the 5th floor. He'd already used every trick in his book, and now there was no turning back. If he tried to retreat now, he'd never make it out. A faint glow pulsed beneath his skin where the data chip was implanted. The display in his vision flickered, 15% complete. That single figure represented a mountain of new information pouring into Ethan's neural interface. He dared to hope the remaining 85% would be just as valuable. "You stupid beast," he muttered, bracing his sword as the next wave of creatures lunged at him. His breath came in controlled bursts, each one measured to keep panic at bay. "Just you wait. Hey?" He activated the chip's secondary protocol and felt the familiar hum of data streams rerouting tactical charts directly to his mind. The monsters roared and charged, but armed with fresh intel, Ethan moved with precision, dashing, parrying, cutting down threats in a fluid dance. Each fallen foe ticked another point of mission progress. Behind him, in the depths of this labyrinthine complex, the collectors waited. Their demands for repayment grew more urgent by the minute. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow and tightened his grip on the hilt. He'd already paid back so much of what he owed, but today he had one goal: finish the job and clear his debt, once and for all. Chapter 160. Interrupted Moment. Ethan paused beside the two lab consoles and spotted a shattered test tube on the floor. Its remaining green liquid, less than half a vial, still sloshed inside. He crouched, retrieved the broken glass, then tapped the concealed compartment in his ring to release a small, empty vial. Steadying himself, he poured the precious fluid into the new container, screwed on its cap, and slipped both vial and fragment back into the ring's hidden pocket. "Come on, you blockhead. Move." He rapped the hulking beast at his side on the flank. At his command, the creature's dull eyes brightened. It drew in a slow breath, summoned its supernatural gift, and closed its eyes to lock onto the teleportation coordinates Ethan had preset. Within moments, electric blue energy crackled around them. A soft pop echoed through the lab, and then Ethan was gone. What Ethan didn't know was that the moment the creature activated its coordinates, the Alliance's superpowered operative, the same one who detected that teleportation while battling the beasts in the plaza outside the base, immediately picked up a new fluctuation in the creature's energy. He recalled Hudi from across the field, planted his hands on Hudi's back, and linked their powers. Identical ripples of spatial distortion appeared between them, as though they'd homed in on a hidden trail. Their combined power readings soared, then abruptly cut off. Wiping sweat from his brow, the agent hurried over to where Lubo was still locked in combat with Athena. He knelt beside him and said quietly, "Master Lubo, the intruder who slipped into the base a moment ago tried to escape, but I intercepted him. He's headed northeast, and he won't be able to teleport again for at least 24 hours. Lubo glanced back at Athena, who hovered in the air, her 5 remaining elves circling warily around her. Over the past hour, Athena had whittled down Lubo's forces from 9 elves to 5, but 2 of those survivors were so badly wounded they could no longer fight. Despite the dwindling numbers, Lubo's expression was anything but satisfied. Chapter 7. The Hunt for the Teleporter. If it weren't for the risk of her falling in battle, Ethan might have unleashed his full power long ago. As it was, Athena stood at the edge of the blasted corridor on the 5th floor, arms folded, watching her troops mop up the last of the resistance. The moment Ethan reappeared, she'd have every reason to sound the retreat. Across the chamber, Ethan's cloak flickered, his signature teleportation shimmer. Athena's jaw tightened. She'd seen that flash before, and knew how dangerous it was. She waved over 2 of her most trusted lieutenants. "Find him," she ordered. "Someone who can disrupt and counter an instantaneous shift. I don't care if their strength matches his. Just get to him fast." "Yes, Commander." Both officers saluted crisply and melted back into the fray. For teleportation to work, the user has to sense and manipulate spatial fluctuations at will, a rare gift among power-gifted warriors. Athena doubted there were many who could rival Ethan's skill, but she trusted the intelligence she'd gathered. Somewhere in this maze of ruined hallways, one of her lieutenants would corner him. Moments later, 2 League trainers, veterans of dozens of skirmishes, dashed off toward a collapsed staircase where Ethan had vanished seconds before. They carried specialized amplifiers designed to scramble the spatial field for a brief window, just enough to trap a teleporter. Athena exhaled slowly, listening as the battle's din swelled around her. This final showdown was nothing like the skirmishes on the lower floors. Here, only raw power and cunning would determine the outcome. She allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. If her men could pin Ethan down, they'd turn the tide for good, and she'd leave with her reputation untarnished. Somewhere in the shadowed corridors, Ethan reappeared, eyes blazing with determination. He sensed the trap closing in. Now, more than ever, he needed a plan that went beyond sheer force. And so the hunt began in earnest. Athena's forces against the most elusive teleporter they'd ever faced. The winner would claim not just this battlefield, but the fate of everyone who still fought on the floors above. Momentary spatial fluctuations, often called blinks, can be detected or even disrupted if the caster is inexperienced or if someone far stronger intervenes. In most cases, it's the latter. Right now, Ethan and his foolish beast companion were bobbing up from the abyss of the Lake of Wrath. The creature lay unconscious, confusion still etched on its features. It had performed the blink the same way it always did, but this time, something went horribly wrong. During the spatial distortion, it had felt as though an unseen force had shoved them back out. Ethan blinked the spray of icy lake water from his eyes and glanced at his fallen ally. Normally, when they blinked, they arrived at their destination with their eyes tightly shut. Instead, they'd surfaced fully submerged, the water's pressure threatening to drag them under. If the elf maiden hadn't plunged in and hauled him up, he might have drowned. Gasping for breath, Ethan managed to steady himself. "Beast," he called out, voice trembling. "What happened?" Ethan's companion, a mute beast, let out a piercing cry, instantly transmitting through telepathy the strange anomaly it had just detected. Ethan's heart raced. Had they been targeted? Or worse, discovered? Had the League or the Rockets realized he'd stolen the data? Did anyone now know his true identity? The longer he lingered, the more likely enemy searchers would descend on them. "Beast, can you teleport us out of here?" he demanded. The creature closed its eyes, searching the spatial coordinates they'd left behind. But when it tried to access the exit pathway, everything fell into disarray. None of the routes registered. At last, it shook its head in frustration. Ethan's suspicions hardened into certainty. Someone had tampered with their escape. "Then get me out of here another way, now." Squinting against the sun and the jagged mountain peaks, he pressed a firm hand to the beast's shoulder. They had to move, fast, before reinforcements from the League or Rockets arrived. Even if a devastating ambush lay ahead, Ethan pushed down the fear. For now, there was only one goal: get away alive. No one pays attention to such a minor part. Not everyone is as dull as Nazi, and few can appreciate the strange charms of the lake's creatures. Mounted on his water beast elf, mockingly called the Mute Beast, Ethan skimmed across Lake Anger's surface with ease. Although the waters swarmed with water elves, most were nothing more than carp kings, placid and harmless. The real threat came from the tyrannosaur dragons that prowled these depths in packs. Encounter one, and you'd face the whole brood. Ethan's pulse quickened at the thought. Fortunately, their hasty escape carried them close to the mountains east of Lake Anger. A short trek through the mist-shrouded forest along the shore would bring them to the foothills, and from there, the open sky and the wide sea. Below them, fish leapt among the reeds, betraying no hint of the rider slipping past. Still shaken, the mute beast swam sluggishly, taking nearly 20 minutes to creep along the shallows. Not once did a tyrannosaur dragon appear. By the time they reached the forest's edge, Ethan dared to hope they'd truly put the lake's terrors behind them. After the recent ordeal, Ethan knew he had to secure a flying spirit, if only as a practical means of travel. It didn't need to be his primary battle companion, just a reliable mount to carry him through the skies. With such a creature at his command, he wouldn't have to skirt the dangers on the ground or spend precious days navigating treacherous paths. Instead, he could soar directly over the Lake of Rage, glide above the mist-shrouded forest, and touch down at the foot of the shrouded mountains in no time. Author's note: this is today's first update. If you enjoy the story, please consider subscribing for a monthly pass, dropping a like, and adding it to your collection. Your support keeps the adventures coming.